Good afternoon. It's 3 p.m. and I'll call to order the Board of Directors regular meeting study session for Thursday, February 13th, 2025. May I have a roll call, please?
Director Meyerhoffen,
Present.
Director Duff,
Present.
Director Martin,
Present.
Vice President Griffith,
Present.
President Sewell.
Here.
Thank you. We have quorum.
Thank you. Seeing that all 5 directors are present, we'll skip item 3. We'll also skip item 4. We'll do that on Tuesday. Item 5, rules of procedure. Counselor?
Yes, according to the rules of procedure adopted by the Board of Directors, all noticed meetings are conducted using Rosenberg's Rules of Order as a procedural guideline. Directors should refrain from responding directly to public comments at meetings of the board. The president of the board presides at all meetings and decides all points of order and procedure during meetings. The president is responsible for the maintenance of order and decorum at all board meetings. No person should be allowed to speak who has not first been recognized by the president. All questions and remarks should be addressed to the president as the presiding officer. No member of the board should speak more than once upon any one subject until every other member of the board wishing to speak on the subject shall have been given the opportunity to speak, and no board member shall interfere with the orderly progress of a board meeting.
Thank you. Item 6, public input. This is the opportunity for members of the public to address the board on matters within the board's jurisdiction. Please limit comments to 3 minutes or less. State law prohibits the board from discussing or taking action on any item not listed on the agenda. Do we have any members of the public wishing to address the board today?
President Sewell, not online.
Okay. Thank you. And we're actually going to be moving a few items up in the agenda today. That will be item 14, DWA Mission Creek Basin Replenishment Assessment Charge Report, as well as item 15, Federal Affairs Update. So item 14, DWA, General Manager.
Yes, thank you, President Sewell. We have asked some members of DWA to provide a update of the assessment charge. I will let them introduce themselves and go over the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. I'm Esther Sines, Desert Water Agency Finance Director, and we are happy to be here to respond to questions that have been posed to us and provide some more background regarding the State Water Project and our replenishment assessment charge and State Water Project tax. And with us today, we have our General Manager, Steve Johnson.
Hello, President Sewell and members of the board. Esther will be giving the presentation. I'll be on backup in case there's questions that she can't answer, but at this time, I'd like to hand it back over to Esther.
Esther's here.
Also with us today, we have one of our board directors, Director Gerald McKenna in the back, as well as our Public Affairs and Conservation Director, Victoria Lord. And so with that, we'll dive into our presentation. So on the items that we're going to cover today, we've kind of broken them up into some general categories in response to the questions that were asked. And there's some bleed over between them. And so, but we've kind of categorized them generally into debt, State Water Project Table A amounts and deliveries, area of benefit, variances and credits, and also the questions with regards to Tropical Storm Hilary. In regards to the debt, we received the question is, what is the outstanding balance of Mission Springs portion of the Desert Water Agency federal infrastructure debt? And to simply put it, Desert Water Agency does not have any federal infrastructure debt. However, we do have indebtedness that was approved by the voters for the State Water Project. This debt is issued by the California Department of Water Resources and managed and maintained by them. DWR continues to issue debt for the State Water Project infrastructure and improvements and reconstruction to this day. Additionally, the question was posed, what was the originating balance of Mission Springs' portion of that infrastructure debt? So Mission Springs has not been allocated a portion of Desert Water Agency's State Water Project debt. Desert Water, we maintain one tax rate area that is assessed the same rate in order to raise the funds necessary to pay the State Water Project statement of charges that the replenishment assessment and also charges that the replenishment assessment charge is insufficient to cover. So think of it as kind of a Venn diagram where on the left-hand side, you have expenses that are State Water Project expenses, just they're on the statement of charges. Then on the other side, you have other replenishment assessment charges. In the center, you have and those other replenishment assessment charges can be paid by the replenishment assessment charge. On the left side, State Water Project charges. On the other side, the replenishment assessment charge. In the center, there is a portion of charges that can either be paid by both. And so when the replenishment assessment charge cannot pay the entire amount, the State Water Project tax comes in and it covers the balance of what it was unable to pay. But it has to be a very specific type of charge that the State Water Project tax can cover, which we'll get into a little bit more in a bit. To give an idea of kind of the magnitude of charges that we are talking about on an annual basis for the State Water Project tax, what you see in front of you is the 2025 statement of charges for the Department of Water Resources for the State Water Project, specifically for Desert Water Agency. In that, we have capital charges of approximately $6.9 million. Minimum OMP&R, and that's your operation, maintenance, power, and replacement components of the State Water Project charges, and that is $11 million. And the variable OMP&R of $5.6 million for a total of $23.6. I'd like to point out that the first two charges here, the capital and the minimum OMP&R charges, those are owed regardless of if any water was delivered in any given year. So last time I was here, we kind of gave the analogy of a car. You're still making your car payment whether you use your car or not. The same thing happens there where, we're still paying some maintenance and we're still paying that capital, that payment on an annual basis, ongoing, regardless of whether we take in any water or not, have anything water delivered. That variable OMP&R, this is just an estimate. When the statement charges are prepared, they base it off of a 55% allocation over term. So that's how much they're estimating, like, hey, if we have a 55% year, because that is a long-term average where you're going to get 55% of your contracted amounts, this is how much you will be anticipating to pay. However, we only get billed on what was actually delivered. So only the variable transportation charges for the water that was actually delivered. So if it ends up not being 55%, if it ends up being 20%, as our current allocation is right now, we have an early allocation factor right now of 20%. We'll only be paying 20% of the charges, so it'll be less than this 5.6. If we receive more, if we receive 100%, well, it's going to be more like $11 million that we'll be paying in those variable transportation charges. So previously, that was just what we're paying for the State Water Project each year. But there is, what have we paid historically for our replenishment program for capital costs? There are other costs associated with importing water into the Coachella Valley. So we have our State Water Project capital costs. That's that $122 million figure up top. Then Desert Water has purchased additional water rights for a total amount of $17.8 million and other replenishment capital of $14.7 million for a total historical cost of $155.3 million. To give a little bit of clarity of what that other replenishment capital costs are, those are for the turnout facilities, the Mission Creek bedding basins, monitoring wells and land and things of that nature. And the reason why we have included the total historical cost here is that it takes the system as a whole and all of the structures, regardless of when they were put into service or where they are located, it takes the system as a whole in order to deliver that water. Okay. Now moving on to State Water Project Table A amount and deliveries. So some questions were asked regarding the contract extension, and I'd like to go into a little bit of detail there. DWA and other state water project contractors negotiated a contract extension from 2035, which was the original contract term expiration date, to 2085. So that's an additional 50 years. That contract extension, it did not renegotiate the debt associated with the State Water Project. Rather, what it did is it allows for the continued operation and maintenance and improvement of the State Water Project facilities through 2085. And this includes the ability to issue new debt for the State Water Project improvements and reconstruction through 2085. If we did not have the contract extension, essentially what would happen is if we had any improvements that needed to be made, here we are in 2025, expiration in 2035, we would only be able to issue a 10-year bond. So we have compaction. And so it would be much more expensive on an annual basis rather than being able to spread that debt service out over the life of whatever that improvement may be, whether it be 30 or 40 years. So that is one of the great benefits of that contract extension, not only for the financing component, but also the continued deliveries of State Water Project water. I went too far. Thanks. And the question on the table also is, will this contract extension provide additional water allocation to Desert Water Agency and Coachella Valley Water District? And the answer is no. It did not provide any additional water allocation to DWA or CVWD, except for if you consider the continued operation on an annual basis. But as far as what our allocation is, it did not provide any additional water. However, there is an additional 100,000 acre feet that the agency does get according to agreement with Metropolitan Water District, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. Next slide, please. To give a little background into how we got to 55,750 acre feet of Table A amounts that the DWA has contracted for. Our original contract amount was 33,000 acre feet, and that was our original contract amount in 1962. A few years later, we had an adjustment of an additional 5,100 acre feet. And in 2003, we negotiated with Metropolitan Water District for a Table A transfer of 11,900, which brought us up to 50,000 acre feet per year of Table A allocation. And in 2010, I had made reference earlier to some additional water rights purchases. This is part of that. So we purchased additional Berenda Mesa Table A water rights, as well as Westlake Farms additional allocation for our total as it stands today of 55,750 acre feet per year of Table A allocation from the State Water Project. Next slide, please. So the Table A transfer from Metropolitan Water District, so that was at 11,900. That was on the previous slide. In 2003, Desert Water Agency and Coachella Valley Water District, we entered in a Table A allocation transfer agreement, and that was for a total of 100,000 acre feet per year, split between the two entities. And this split, what it did is it brought, of course, it provided more water for the ability to import more water into the Coachella Valley, but we have CVWD and DWA were both state water contractors, and it kind of brought us to more equal into how much water we were actually producing in our respective service areas as compared to how much we were importing. And so that brought us to 71.3% in CVWD they're contracted for, and 28.7% that Desert Water Agency is contracted for with the State Water Project, which brought it kind of more into alignment at that point in time with what we were producing in our respective service areas. And I'd like to go in a little bit, give a little bit more background into what this Table A allocation is. While it's what we have contracted for with our state water project, so 55,750, that's the maximum amount that Desert Water Agency would be able to receive from the state water project in any given year. However, what happens if they aren't able to deliver 100% of the allocation because of hydrological conditions or other operational constraints in the state water project facilities? So if currently we have a 20% allocation, so we're only going to get 20% of that 55,750. But if we get 100%, or if there's even more water than that, we're not going to get any more. You have to essentially purchase that 1 year water for an additional cost. So it just doesn't automatically come to you, but these allocations, Table A allocations, they provide us essentially our percentage of what we get out of the total up to 55,750. Next slide, please. Future water development. So with the goal of reinforcing water reliability for the Western Coachella Valley, Desert Water is participating in the Sites Reservoir Project. And the Sites project will provide the opportunity for additional water storage for delivery to participants in dry years. So this is an off aqueduct facility where water will be pumped into in wet years and stored. And then in dry years, when the state water project capacity within the distribution system is not being used, we'll be able to take the water off of that and have deliveries in dry years. So retain the water in the wet year, be able to deliver it into the dry years. And we have our participation level of our water right is 6,500 acre feet per year, and a storage capacity of approximately 40,000 acre feet that we'll be able to store in there for delivery in dry years. Now, because we do not have a direct connection to the state water project down into the Coachella Valley, we do have that exchange agreement with Metropolitan Water District. So it's a little bit more nuanced than just in a dry year, we're going to receive more water into the valley, but all that water will be exchanged through that agreement as well, so that we will be able to still, with that additional water right, we'll be able to bring in more water into the valley. Be it in a dry year, we still have to work that through with Metropolitan. And the Sites Reservoir Project, its anticipated construction is to begin in 2026 for beginning operations in 2032. So they'll begin filling that reservoir at that time. With regards to funding, the project is estimated to be a $3.9 billion project. And that is the estimates are currently available that were done in 2021. In about November, they're supposed to be releasing an updated price estimate based off of more design has been done. That was previewed only, I think, like a 30% design figure. They'll be able to provide a more refined as they have been doing more investigations and design and engineering around that. So we'll have updated estimates as far as what the construction will actually cost. And with that, for that $3.9 billion, Sites has already formally been invited to apply for a $2.2 billion low interest WIFIA loan, which I believe is the largest in the history of the program. So that's a great program where the participants will be able to capitalize on that low interest for a large chunk of the funding that's necessary for the capital for constructing the reservoir. Also, Sites has received approximately $516 million in federal funded committed to the project already as well. And of that, it's still a large dollar amount. DWA's portion is approximately 100 million at this point in time, based off of the figures that we have thus far. Next slide, please. Need to go slide 14, please. Okay. Water delivery allocation to Mission Creek. As I stated before, there is no direct connection to the state water project into the Coachella Valley. So that water is exchanged with Metropolitan Water District for Colorado River water, gallon for gallon. That exchange water is delivered from the Colorado River into the Indio and Mission Creek subbasins in proportion to the production between the two subbasins. Now, that is a part of the Mission Springs, Coachella Valley Water District, and Desert Water Agency 2004 settlement agreement. And currently, those delivery allocations are 92% is delivered to the Indio subbasin, the remaining 8% delivered to the Mission Creek subbasin. Now, that is not a stagnant number. It has not always been and will not always be a 92% to 8% split. It is based off of the production each year. So, for example, if this is the percentages here, that was the production of 2023, calendar year 2023, which then guided our replenishments figures of what was required in calendar year 2024. Now, moving forward, let's say 2024 was 9% or 10% for argument's sake in Mission Creek subbasin as compared to Indio subbasin. That means our deliveries in 2025 will be 10% into the Mission Creek subbasin and 90% into the Indio subbasin. So it is a moving figure and it changes from year to year. Okay, slide 16, please. Now moving on to the area of benefit, and this is where we're going to talk more about kind of like the state water project tax and the replenishment assessment. When I was here previously last year, we had provided information regarding the state water project tax and replenishment assessment charge. And I just want to provide a little high level overview of that as we get into these next slides. So what's the state water project tax used for? It is for the capital and minimum OMP&R costs associated with the state water project. And also the state water project RAC expenses, which would be, think, the variable charges that are associated with delivering the water in excess of what we collect in RAC revenues, or replenishment assessment charge revenues, where it's infeasible to collect enough revenue with the RAC rate to pay for those charges. DWA, we only use the state water project tax revenue for charges that appear on DWA's statement of charges from the Department of Water Resources. They are not used for any other purpose. If it does not appear on those invoices, Desert Water does not pay with state water project tax. I should say the state water project tax does not go to pay for it. It's only what appears on those invoices. And also, DWA can only have one tax rate within its boundaries for the state water project. The current tax rate is 7 cents per $100 of assessed value. Now that rate, we do long range tax planning for that rate. Because our goal is to, number one, smooth the rate, so we are not hiking it up in 1 year and taking it down and up and down, but also to make sure that we have to cover all of the charges. And with doing that, we've been able to decrease that tax rate from 10 to 7 cents. So that's 30% over the last 2 years. And with the setting of that tax rate, Desert Water Agency's Board of Directors are the oversight on setting that tax. And of whom, there is a significant representation on our board from the community of Desert Hot Springs. To move to slide 17, please. The question was posed, does the state water project infrastructure directly benefit the Mission Springs service area? And yes, the Desert Hot Springs community is directly benefited by the state water project, as the tax pays for water supply and infrastructure in order to receive the water through the exchange agreement with Metropolitan that's delivered into the Coachella Valley for recharge to the Mission Creek subbasin. And it's also important to note that the state water project tax, it isn't a user fee, so it's not collected in proportion to the use. Rather, it provides a community benefit collected in proportion to property value. So if we think, the same goes for when we have a tax for, let's say, our schools. We may not have a child in the school, but yet we're still paying for the tax for that to be able to fund that schooling because it does provide a benefit to the entire community. It's the same thing with the state water project tax, where it provides a benefit to the community that we are able to continue to have the water supply to be able to develop our communities and let them grow. And knowing that we have a sustainable water supply for that, driving that economic success in our communities. Slide, please. So how much tax has Desert Water Agency collected from the Mission Springs Water District residents within their service district since the original agreement went into effect? Desert Water maintains tax revenue records for the agency's tax rate area as a whole, and we do not have the figures to be able to indicate how much has been collected in the Desert Hot Springs community or Mission Springs Water District service area. Our service area includes the city of Palm Springs, Desert Hot Springs, and a portion of Cathedral City, and also a portion of the unincorporated Riverside County. So that is our whole entire tax rate area, and we have those figures for that. And also the county, when they're providing us those figures, it is just one lump sum because we only maintain one tax rate area. So that is how it's provided and how it's maintained in our financial records. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the replenishment assessment charge. The replenishment assessment charge revenue is used to fund the Desert Water's groundwater replenishment program. As I was explaining before, kind of that Venn diagram, we have on the right, on one side, we have charges that are only that can be paid for by the RAC revenue, as well as some that can be paid, some expenses that can be paid by either the replenishment assessment charge or the state water project tax. And the replenishment, but one thing that the replenishment assessment charge cannot do, it cannot pay for state water project debt. It does not pay for any portion of that, any of those capital charges. It only pays for the variable component, the off aqueduct power, and the state water project delta water charge, as well as supplemental replenishment water costs and replenishment of water spreading costs. So such as the spreading basins and the operation and maintenance of those. Next slide. With regards to how much recharge has Mission Springs Water District paid for, private pumpers and Desert Water are not charged the replenishment assessment according to what has actually been recharged, but rather only what has been produced. So I have the amounts of what has been charged to Mission Springs Water District for in relation to the water produced by Mission Springs Water District for service to your customers. Prior to 2002, Mission Springs Water District has paid $86,000. And from 2002 to December 2024, $18.5 million, for a total of just over $18.5 million in total since replenishment assessment charges have been paid by Mission Springs Water District. On the next slide, I have it broken out by year. Now there's really small numbers on there. That is the amount per year. I have a tag on there for per year because it was requested how much have we paid for each year. So those tags are there for your use. But this is that 18.5 million as it breaks down into each year. You'll notice in 2024, it is a little bit less. I would just like to clarify that these are the amounts that have actually been paid. At the time of the preparation of this presentation, the fourth quarter had not been paid yet, so it wasn't included here. So it may look artificially low. Next slide. Also, I'd like to point out that we do a lot of talking about the Mission Creek Subbasin area of benefit. However, our replenishment program, it does cover both the Mission Creek Subbasin area of benefit, as well as the Indio subbasin area of benefit, of which Mission Springs does have wells within the Indio subbasin area of benefit. So Mission Springs, the RAC received from Mission Springs Water District is not just specific to the Mission Creek area benefit, but rather both of them. So Mission Springs has been funding the replenishment activities in both subbasins. Granted, it is in proportion to the use of in each subbasin. Next slide. On this chart, we have the Mission Creek State Water Project deliveries. This is specific just to Mission Creek, to the spreading basins at those facilities. And since 2002 to 2024, there has been 174.9 thousand acre feet delivered to the subbasins. And this is the breakdown per year of how much has been delivered to each. Now, you'll notice from the previous chart where you have consistent payments year over year based off of what has been produced, it does not align with how it's been replenished. And that is Desert Water Agency is taking full advantage of the water that's available when it's available to put it in the ground. So it's there so that when the use happens, it's there. So they do not align. It's kind of like our savings account that we have in there available for when it's needed. So we are recharging to make sure it's there, keep our water levels up. So we are avoiding those undesirable impacts to subsidence and other factors if we did not keep those water levels up. Next slide, please. Another question that was posed was, what's the total expenditure since 2002 for the Mission Creek replenishment activities? This one is a little bit difficult to try and break out between the two, because between Indio subbasin and Mission Creek subbasin, because there are activities in both subbasins that they benefit each other. And there are program expenses that benefit both, and they are not separated out into both based off of the benefit to each, because Desert Water, we manage our program as a replenishment program as a whole. So the majority of the infrastructure that enables DWA to replenish the subbasins in Mission Springs service area exists outside of Mission Springs service area. For example, the State Water Project infrastructure and the whitewater replenishment facilities. However, DWA does have a cost share agreements for our whitewater replenishment facilities, where DWA pays for the proportionate share based on production, and CVWD also pays for its proportionate share based off of production in the Mission Creek subbasin. So with that, because we have facilities outside the Mission Creek subbasin, it's just as, you know, if you were thinking of your cell phone, and if you had your cell phone and you were trying to make a phone call, but you're only using the infrastructure that was inside your service area or inside your property or your city, it would not work as well as it would without taking advantage of the infrastructure as a whole. So that's why we manage it as a whole. There are benefits of all of the infrastructure, even though you're only using the capacity of a part of it, the whole infrastructure is needed. And so that's why we manage things all together. Next slide, please. I do have the cost for the program as a whole, though. For our operation maintenance power replacement costs from the fiscal year 2002 to 2024. For the State Water Project expense, this is less the variable transportation cost. So this is one of those costs that we would pay whether we received any water or not. That is $212.9 million in that 22-year time frame. For the State Water Project variable transportation costs, that is that variable amount only in proportion, only when we receive the water, has been $49.5 million. Also, we have other replenishment program costs of $49.6 million, and that includes things such as labor benefits associated with managing the agency's replenishment program efforts, legal costs, consulting fees, insurance, and maintenance of the spreading basins, both the Whitewater and the Mission Creek spreading basins. And those costs are proportionally allocated to the replenishment program and kept separate from all of the agency's domestic water side. So this is only specific to the replenishment program and is kept kept in a separate fund and does not bleed over from our other potable water side. And through Mission Springs Water District's RAC payments, replenishment assessment charges, Mission Springs customers have paid approximately 5.9% of these operation, maintenance, power, and placement replenishment programs since 2002. Next slide, please. I also have the amount of the facilities that are specifically within Mission Springs Water District service area, and likewise the Mission Creek Subbasin. At $6.2 million of facility capital costs for the Mission Creek spending basins, and the operation and maintenance for those 22 years of $1.7 million for $7.9 million in total. But again, to keep it in perspective, those would have no value to our replenishment program without the rest of the replenishment system. Next slide. The question was also posed, what variances or credits are provided to Mission Springs for the water CVWD pumps from Mission Creek each year? DWA and CVWD, we have a water management agreement to address just that. DWA and CVWD, we pay for the proportionate share of the replenishment program expenditures in the Mission Creek and Indio subbasins based off of production. And so this goes to cover things like the groundwater recharge facilities, and also we share expenses for those variable transportation costs. So because they are variable based off of how much is actually delivered, we feel that those should also be shared by who is actually using that water that is delivered. So that's all a part of our agreement. Currently, between the subbasins, as we previously mentioned, 92% is in the Indio subbasin and 8% is in the Mission Creek subbasin as far as production. Now, that was in 2023. But if we talk about between the two districts, Desert Water Agency has a 26% production in our service area as compared to 74% in CVWD's service area. So we are splitting costs for the State Water Project for the costs that we share based off of that split. And it is the same thing. It changes every year based off of the production. It is not a stagnant number. But when we're talking about sharing the facility costs, let's say for the Mission Creek recharge facilities, CVWD pays for 31.5% and DWA pays for 68.5%, because that is the amount of production that happens between the two districts within the Mission Creek subbasin. So we are sharing, we are paying for our proportionate share. That therefore, all of our third-party producers, they get a credit for what CVWD is doing. So it is baked into the numbers of our replenishment assessment charges. We take into account those credits that we receive from Coachella Valley Water District for the water that is produced. And if you think back to when we were talking about the Table A, how much Table A does CVWD have as compared to DWA? That's about a 70-30 split. 70% Table A is CVWD and about 30% is DWA. Now that is different than our approximately 75-25, currently 26-74% split for those State Water Project charges. So DWA is typically on the receiving end of payments from CVWD because they are using more of what is being paid for. DWA has been paying more upfront and we get reimbursed by them. So that is also taken into account when we determine what that replenishment assessment charge is. Next slide, please. The question was also asked what variances or credits are provided to Mission Springs Water District for the total rainfall and snowmelt received each year. So that rainfall and snowmelt is what we would consider our natural recharge. And while we don't in our calculation indicate that we had this much, an X amount of natural recharge in the year, therefore we are not going to charge on that. But it is accounted for in our calculation when determining what the replenishment assessment charge is. The replenishment assessment charge is applied to all water produced from the Mission Creek subbasin. And the important part to note is that that charge is set at a rate so that we can recover the amount of revenue requirement that we need. So if the rack was applied to a smaller quantity of water, the rate would have to be higher in order to generate the same amount of revenue that's required to maintain that replenishment program. Next slide, please. I have a little visual here to essentially say the same thing. So scenario one is how it actually occurs, where for argument's sake, we have 100,000, we have a 100 acre feet of water that's produced. And we have a $500 revenue requirement that's needed in order to manage the program. Therefore, we need a $5 rate on each of those 100 acre feet. And for argument's sake, scenario two, let's say it was possible to account for all of the natural recharge and say that, well, you don't need to pay the replenishment assessment charge on what is natural recharge. So if that were the case, and we were able to break that out, for example, 20% was that natural recharge and 80% was artificial replenishment, but we still have the $500 that we need to collect of that replenishment program. So we would need to set our rate at $6.25 in order to generate that revenue on a smaller amount of water. So while we're not explicitly stating that there is a credit for that, it is used in order to determine the amount that replenishment assessment charge needs to be, because Desert Water Agency's Enabling Act in Water Code Section Appendix 100 states that it is the replenishment assessment charge is applied on all production. And so that's how we apply it based off of that. Next slide, please. And to our last section, Tropical Storm Hilary, we had some questions about that. Next slide. So Tropical Storm Hilary did create some damage to our Mission Creek recharge facilities. Thankfully, that damage was limited to the debris basin and was able to catch the debris flow to prevent damage to the other basins, which, as it was intended, it was designed to do that. So that basin was intended to catch that debris flow and essentially get destroyed in the event of a storm event like that. However, it still needed to be reconstructed in order to put our facilities back into service. So that contracted work was completed on May 9th, 2024. For a total cost of $304,000. A part of that work, they removed sediment, they regraded the slopes, and placed riprap on the northwest corner of the basin in order to fortify a bit more. So hopefully, if we have another one of those storm events, it fares a little bit better. DW resumed deliveries on July 1, 2024. Now, we have indicated before that we were over-delivered into the Mission Creek subbasin. Because of that storm event, we had to cut off all deliveries, and we did dip below the threshold of where we became a little bit under-delivered. And we worked with Metropolitan Water District to prolong our deliveries in the calendar year. So as of December 2024, according to our calculations, the basins have been brought into balance. Now we're currently working on finalizing those figures, but we did, according to the settlement agreement with Mission Springs, DWA, and CVWD in 2004, it had a timeline of 20 years to be able to meet that, bring the basins into balance. So we were able to do that by that 20-year deadline. So with that, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Any questions from the board, Director Martin?
First of all, I really appreciate the information you've shared today, and it's important for us to understand, but I'm still not clear. It seems like we're getting charged for services or delivery of water that we're not receiving. And I wanted to get the input from our general manager and any of the board members on that, and whether I'm understanding clearly that issue or not. You seem to justify it in the presentation you've given, but it still doesn't ring true to me for some reason. So
Did you want to respond, Brian?
I'm not going to respond to her slides.
Well, and then just a direct question, are we receiving the services from Desert Water Agency that we're paying for? That's what
The engineering reports break down the costs that are associated with the operation of those facilities as well as bringing water down. And then that's how they establish the rack. Why we are asked to comment on that, that is a DWA function. And much with any other engineering report, you either accept those findings or you don't. But typically that's what the board votes on to move forward to make a cost analysis, if you will. So based on the engineering report, the answer is yes.
the reason I asked you directly is that for a number of years, we were told by the previous general manager that we were not receiving the services that we're paying for. So I was just kind of curious what your position was, your take on it.
I think the reference there would be the 20-year balance out of the settlement agreement, and that was the reference she just made, is by last year, we were able to get back in balance, as we believe.
Director Meyerhoffen? Questions or
Yes,
comments?
thank you. If I remember correctly, back in 2000, when these ponds here were originally built, that DWA almost lost their allotted amount of water, and it cost a couple extra million to hurry up and build these. Of course, you might not have been around in 2000, but so that kind of added to the original cost. I appreciate your presentation. It breaks it all down as to what we're paying for, but I'm still kind of at a loss, like Director Martin here is, and I think that loss comes to, I've been around since about 81, and I started studying environmental horticulture about 2020. So I've watched the whole Coachella Valley, what's going on. Desert Hot Springs looks like a dust bowl. But you folks over there in Palm Springs are looking good with all the grass and all the trees and everything. So it's very difficult for the people on this side of the freeway to justify what you want to charge. I mean, how many golf courses do you have over there in Palm Springs, just out of curiosity?
I am not aware of the account of golf courses.
Are you aware that each 18-hole golf course, how much water it takes every day?
We do have studies and we do have staff that work on the consumption for the golf courses, yes.
Well, we need the golf courses, we need the tourism, we need that to keep going in the Coachella Valley. The point is there's an awful lot of water being used there. There's non-essential turf that could probably be taken out of some of those. The point I'm really trying to make here is I don't understand what we're paying for either, because it's all getting used downstream. And that's what I've been familiar with over the years. What are the residents of Desert Hot Springs and the surrounding community paying for when they get their tax bill?
Would you like me to respond?
If you
Okay.
like, yes.
So the residents of Desert Hot Springs, they are paying for the proportionate use of the replenishment assessment charge. That charge is directly in proportion to how much is used because it is based off of what is produced. When it comes to the State Water Project tax, that what appears on the tax bill, that is based off of the amount of property value that there is. Now, I'm not aware of what that split is between the Desert Hot Springs and the other cities within Desert Water Agency's boundaries. However, it does provide benefit to the community as a whole. When we're thinking of the golf courses in Palm Springs and the entities that run those courses and the tourism that is supported by those entities, that creates a benefit to the valley as a whole, such as jobs and other benefits, whether they are within the specific city limits or not. So therefore, it does provide a benefit to the Coachella Valley as a whole, as well as to Desert Water's tax rate area as a whole.
Actually, when I was studying turf grass management at the golf course, the golf industry was a $3 billion industry, and Coachella Valley was bringing in 1 billion of that. So yes, it's very important to our economy, and you won't get an argument with me there. The problem I'm having here is, when is DWA going to clamp down and get rid of some of this foliage and everything that our customers are actually paying for, and we're not getting any benefit out of it? And meanwhile, our properties look I don't know, just the desert.
Yeah. With regards to the conservation element, as I'm sure you're aware, the conservation is a California way of life. I mean, Desert Water Agency, we have our targets that we need to meet too, and they are quite aggressive. So that is something that is going to be a multi-year plan addressing just that. Because yes, we do need to address the conservation aspect of those entities within our service area, because we do have a lot of that foliage and grass, and that is what I believe is leading to our aggressive targets that we have to meet. And that is a long-term plan that we are working on currently in how to reach those targets. So there is more yet to come on that, because that is a known thing that needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your detailed presentation today. I'm hopeful that I'd be able to get a copy of your slides if possible. They would be very helpful for me to be able to have to reference back to when I'm digesting this a little better. I have just a couple little questions, and maybe it will help you understand where I think some of us are coming from in our concern that we are trying to be able to help justify to our residents who don't understand either. And so, for example, the Sites Reservoir and all the additional debt that is being taken on by DWA to partner with the Sites Reservoir project. You said 6,500 acre feet. So let's just stay with the 8%. That would be 520 acre feet a year, potentially, to Mission Creek of that. And I'm just being very simplistic. It would make more sense to all of us if our taxes were based on 8% or whatever that percentage is. So when you're giving the example of the $5 because you must meet 500, well, to go toward my other director's comments, if we're only responsible for $3 of it, and the other users are responsible for 7, they should be paying 7 and we should be paying 3. So I think that if our benefit is so much less than the majority of your district, we should be paying for that, not the same as everyone else, because we're not reaping the same benefit. And some of the questions that you answered, I appreciated you answering them, but they weren't quite what was being asked. For example, when we were talking about, I'm trying to find my little notes here, I'm sorry. When you were referring to, sorry, just one second. How the table A is been extended for 2085, and I understand that for your debt ratio and all of that. But were your users allowed the opportunity to have a seat at the table to discuss whether they wanted to proceed with that? Did we get an equal seat at the table, aside from our 3 representatives on your board who may or may not be representing the issues and desires of their community? Did we get a seat at that discussion to talk about your partnership with sites and whether or not that was really the best choice for our valley, or were there maybe some other things that we could have talked about? I appreciate the settlement and the 3 entities being at the table for the engineers' reports and things like that, but I don't feel that we're really at the table equally together. And I think that's a big part of the problem. And although we now, for the first time, have board representation on your board, it may not necessarily be showing a lot of effectiveness to our residents here. We're not getting a lot of positive feedback from them as far as here's what we're doing for you. Here's how we can help clarify this. So there's some partnership that I think we need to improve upon as far as open public communication. And then in regards to the SWP taxes, I was actually referring in my questions to the electrical plant taxes that are accumulated on here in Desert Hot Springs. Would you be able to bring back information on where that money is spent, the money that you are collecting from that utility power plant tax?
Like I said, the state water project tax is one tax rate area without regard to
So that's not a
direct.
separate utility tax that you're receiving
We
as
do
being-
receive, so SBE, yes, there is a separate, but also there is no delineation of where it is coming from. It can come from Verizon, it can come from Spectrum, it can come from the power plants, it can come from the railroads and all of that. So we don't know where exactly it's from.
Okay. And I think that that is also part of our concern. And it's always that way, right? When you have a big parent entity that is maybe on the other side of the tracks, so to speak, the other people are always going to be concerned about the fairness and equality and equity that is there. And it's not a dirty word to me. I have to believe equity is very important. So I just, I'm hopeful that we can continue this conversation and get into a little bit more of the weeds to have a better understanding. Because in your presentation about specifically what money has been invested here at the Mission Creek Subbasin, at the Indio Basin, not all the downline. I want to know what has the percentage of investment. Are we getting 8% of your whole investment reinvested here to maintain what's here? I mean, our rain gauge at your replenishment facility was out for a year, and we didn't even get to calculate all of the Hurricane Hillary stormwater. So those are some of the concerns that don't match up with some of what you said. So I'm hopeful that we can kind of get into a little bit more of the weeds on that and have some more discussion. But thank you so much for coming. And I know that's not easy to try and give a outer entity a brief description that gives details. So I'm hopeful we can continue. Thank you.
Vice President?
Thanks for crossing the 10. Say that to everyone that comes up this way. I believe Gene, she was open today.
Yes, it was.
So that let's hope it's open on the way home, right? I want to thank you. I appreciate all that information. I had some questions that are kind of out there. I haven't heard any updates on sites. So what is the expected completion are they saying now?
2032.
2032. Okay. You talked about some possible federal grants. Would they be coming hopefully after 2028 or before?
I am not aware of the timing of them. I just know that there are federal grants. I believe they are for the construction.
Okay. And are there alternate plans since grants seem to be frozen for the time being?
We haven't had any communications with them as that. So what I do know about the federal grants, while they were the memo was rescinded as far as the freeze, they're still being reevaluated. So yes, they are federal. So I would assume that they could still potentially be reevaluated. Yes.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I'll echo the comments. I do really appreciate all of you coming over and our improved communication. I feel like the last couple of years between our two agencies. I also had a question on the sites. That 6,500, are you able to bank that in any year, or is that just once you've reached your 100% allocation in a wet year that then you could? I mean, I'm trying to better understand when.
Separate than the state water project allocation as it currently has it. So we have the ability to take 6,500 per year when it's available.
Would that be in addition to your 55,000?
Yes, this
Okay.
is additional. This is new.
And then, like Director Duff said, if we could get the slides, that would be great. I'd like to kind of dig deeper on them, but just a question that came into my mind. Hopefully it makes sense, but the 55,000 that you mentioned acre feet, that's just DWA's. That's not any of CBWD's
That
application.
is correct.
And then we're given that 8% or however it might fluctuate year to year. But CVWD is maybe a third of the production in Mission Creek. Do they also have an allocation that they're replenishing?
So the production in the Mission Creek Subbasin, that is in its entirety. That is including what is in DWA's service area and what's in CVWD's service area. That is the total production of the entire subbasin as compared to the production within DWA and CVWD's service areas within the Indio Subbasin. So it does include their proportion as well. What they have produced as well is included in that 8%.
But then is it just our residents that are paying for that?
No. So CVWD has what they are producing from their wells is subject to their rack and their customers are paying for it. And what is in DWA's service area is subject to our rack and only our customers are paying for it, as well as only subject to the expenses that are within DWA's program. And CVWD's replenishment assessment charges go to pay for their expenses in the program because it costs more than just what is DWA's because they are contributing to it as well. But those expenses are kept separate and are on the CVWD side. So Mission Springs Water District customers are only paying for the production of Mission Springs Water District and the expenses associated with that production.
Okay. And then you showed one graph that just had the different deliveries throughout the years. And I know there's a handful of dry years where we didn't get any.
That's correct.
And I believe the reasoning was we had over deliveries in prior years. But I think we expressed as a board, is there a way that we can try and meet that 8% or whatever it might be for the year, even if it is in a drier year? Or is that really out of our hands as far as when DWA wants to over deliver and then under deliver?
Our goal going forward is DWA's desire is that we will stay current, not get over delivered, not get under delivered. We want to stay current with whatever the deliveries are. So previously it was, a large amount was put in and then they had to bring it down into balance. So that was one tactic of doing it. But now we're hoping to stay current and so that we don't have to make things up or cut off to keep them in balance according to the agreement. Granted, that is also dependent on other conditions. What if there's another storm that takes our facilities out? What if there's something that makes it so CVWD cannot take deliveries at the whitewater spreading basins and we need to place that water over here up to the capacity that we can? We only have a certain amount because it's definitely not as large as I think it's 100 acres that CVWD has. It's a much smaller facility in Mission Creek. So, things like that can happen and to where it will get out of balance, but the desire is to keep it even going forward.
Great, thank you. Anything further from the board? No? Thank you very much for the presentation and we really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Moving on to Laura with our federal affairs update, item 15.
Hi, good afternoon. As always, it's great to be with you here from Washington. As your staff can attest by the amount of times I've emailed them in the last month, that there's been quite a bit of activity here in the last few weeks. So as you know, on January 20th, Donald Trump was sworn in as the 47th president of the United States. Since his inauguration, the Senate's been working quickly to confirm as many of his cabinet secretaries and agency heads as possible. To date, we've seen the Senate confirm 11 of the president's cabinet secretaries, which include secretaries for the Department of Energy, the Department of the Interior, and the EPA. President Trump's first few days in office were jam-packed with executive actions. In fact, his first day in the Oval Office, he issued a total of 46 presidential actions. Most of these actions came in the form of executive orders. These executive orders fell into the following issue buckets: the federal workforce, federal government modernization and efficiency, federal agency regulations and policies, energy and the environment, and immigration and homeland security. It's important to note that executive orders can only direct or compel action from the federal government. 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration attempted to freeze all grant and loan funding, an action which, as you can imagine, definitely sent shockwaves through all of Washington, D.C. I wanted to take a couple of moments now to walk you through the events of that week and let you know where things stand regarding the funding freeze. So on Monday, January 27th, the White House Office of Management and Budget sent a brief memo to all federal agencies entitled "The Temporary Pause of Agency Grant Loan and Other Financial Assistance Programs." The memo stated that all federal agencies would begin a review process of federal grants and loans to determine if they were in line with the executive orders President Trump issued in his first week in office. During the time of this review, agencies were directed to freeze all disbursement of grants and loans. As you can imagine, this caused a great deal of confusion, not only in the federal agencies, but on Capitol Hill as well. The following day, OMB provided 2 additional documents to federal agencies regarding the freeze. The first was a brief Q&A about the pause, and the second provided more specific guidance about the types of review they would need to do for their programs. Later that day, a U.S. District Court judge issued a temporary injunction blocking the proposed freeze on federal funding, citing concerns about its legality. This temporary injunction was scheduled to last through Monday, February 3rd. The next day, Wednesday, January 29th, the White House Office of Management and Budget rescinded its memo from Monday evening. The expectation was the rescission of the memo would lift the federal funding freeze. However, about 2 hours after the rescission occurred, the White House press secretary made a comment that, quote, "This is not a rescission of the federal funding freeze. It is simply a rescission of the memo," end quote. This comment created and caused some additional confusion here in Washington about whether or not the freeze actually was in place. In fact, in response to these comments, 22 state attorney generals, including California, filed a suit in a different U.S. district court seeking a temporary restraining order against the freeze. So 2 days later, on Friday, January 31st, the judge ruled in favor of the 22 state attorney generals and granted a temporary restraining order blocking the federal funding freeze. This ruling effectively put it on pause, at least temporarily, while the legal battle continued in court. The following Monday, February 3rd, the judge in the initial case also issued a temporary restraining order. So where are we now? There are currently 2 temporary restraining orders in effect related to the funding freeze. As a result, many grantee recipients have been able to access and draw down previously awarded funding. However, there are still reports of grantees having challenges both communicating with federal agency staff regarding grants and loans, as well as awards not yet being released. Neither of the current temporary restraining orders have an end date. It is anticipated they will both remain in effect until the courts consider additional forthcoming motions for a preliminary injunction. I expect there may also be additional legal action taken both in response to the funding freeze as well as the larger issue of the administration having the ability to impound funds that Congress appropriates. Before I turn it over to you all for questions, I wanted to flag a few items that Washington's going to be focusing on in the coming weeks. You can expect to hear more about these both from me as well as likely in the media. So the first is the fiscal year 25 appropriations bills. The current continuing resolution runs until March 14th, and as we're just about 1 month away from that, Congress will need to do something between now and then in order to avoid a government shutdown. At this time, there appear to be 3 options on the table. The first is to finish and pass all 12 of the FY25 appropriations bills. The second would be pass yet another short-term continuing resolution. And the third option would be to pass a year-long CR for the rest of fiscal year 2025. Impoundment is a word you're going to start hearing much more about when it comes to federal funding. As you all know, Congress has the power of the purse as designated by the Constitution. As such, Congress appropriates federal funding to the agencies, and the agencies spend the funding according to Congress's direction. In 1974, Congress passed the Impoundment Control Act, which explicitly limits the president's ability to withhold or delay the expenditure of funds that Congress has appropriated. The Trump administration has indicated that it is looking to pursue a legal challenge to the Impoundment Control Act, and this would allow federal agencies to impound, meaning withhold, funds appropriated by Congress. It is expected that this issue will likely go all the way to the Supreme Court. And lastly, budget reconciliation. So budget reconciliation is a special process that Congress uses to pass certain types of laws more quickly and with fewer obstacles. It is limited to legislation that directly impacts the federal budget, such as changes to taxes, spending, or debt limits. Strict rules ensure the focus remains on budget-related matters, so policy or programs without a clear budgetary impact can't be included. One key advantage of reconciliation is that it bypasses the Senate filibuster, meaning it allows bills to pass with a simple majority vote instead of the usual 60. Budget reconciliation is also generally only used when one party controls the House and the Senate and the White House. I know that is quite a lot to throw at you, so I want to give you a moment to ask any questions you may have.
Thank you, Laura. Any questions, Director Duff?
How are you doing?
We're doing okay. We're doing okay. It's been a bit of a quick pace back here the last few weeks, so they're keeping us on our toes.
Thank you for the update.
Of course.
Vice President?
Yeah, I have some questions. So
Sure.
regarding the Impoundment Act, I mean,
Mhm.
something you said earlier as far as constitutionally, the Senate holds the purse, but we know that right now there's an administration doesn't necessarily play by the rules. As far as the impoundment, if that goes to court, do you think that would place a lot of things on hold until that question is resolved?
So that's a really good question because I think we're seeing some of that already. So as I indicated, there are two court orders that are requiring federal agencies to not withhold funds. But I can tell you just today alone, I've seen two federal agencies withdraw completely current NOFOs that have been pending. I'm also aware of several agencies who, while they aren't freezing funds, are certainly taking some additional time to review things that have already been awarded. So I do think that you're correct that we're certainly seeing that there could continue to be a slowdown of releasing of federal funds while this issue gets resolved.
And then my other question is, obviously, because I'm a little bit selfish and I worry about us. So I know we have our WARDA and all that. How do you think our chances of getting additional grant money in the foreseeable future is the prospects are dim, or do you have some kind of hope that we can possibly limp along for a little bit with just a little bit here and there?
So, I think there is still reason to be hopeful. I mean, particularly for you all, one of the places we are seeing, continued support for, whether on the Republican or the Democratic side, is, what we consider more traditional infrastructure, right? Highway infrastructure, water infrastructure. And the fact that you all have been working for such a long time with the Army Corps, Army Corps of Engineers projects are very unique because they are projects that are built with the federal funds and built by the Corps. So I do think that, we are fortunate to be in a different spot right now because of that funding. And we do know from previous years that the Corps does have funding to continue to work on our project. And there are a lot of projects in both red and blue parts of the country, very large projects that are going to continue to need that Army Corps funding. So I do think we may still have some challenges, but we are definitely in a better position than others, frankly.
And then finally, because I know that because it is California, obviously the current president's not a fan, but maybe maybe because it is water, I mean, can we tell them we're just installing a big tap that will run the water for us?
It has been interesting. I mean, obviously, everyone is aware of kind of the relationship between the governor and the president. But I've been meeting with a couple of California Republican offices over the last 2 weeks, and it's been interesting to hear from them. They are even talking about how perhaps there's been some small steps of improvement in that relationship. So I think there is continued to be hope there, but certainly water seems to be one of the places in California that the president is certainly interested. Obviously, we've seen him, pay a great deal of attention to that. So I think that also helps us put us in a stronger position potentially with the administration.
Okay, thanks.
Director Martin?
Yeah, along those lines, there's been a lot of media attention to availability of water in the California because of the fires and their inability to fight the fire because the water wasn't available and things like that. I would think that would put us in a better negotiating position to obtain grants and things like that. Are you hopeful with respect to that issue that we would be receiving any grants associated with water availability, etc.?
Yeah, I definitely think we are going to see, and we saw the same thing in the first Trump administration, a focus on what they called resiliency. And I think that's going to continue to be front and center, especially what we've, just seen in the last couple of months up in Los Angeles related to the fire and the ability of water. I think that's going to continue to be something that we're going to talk about, and that projects that can seek to address that are going to continue to be seen as competitive.
Director Mayo?
I don't know how to really say this other than it's just the darndest thing I've ever had to listen to. People say we're sitting here trying to second guess what politicians are going to do. That really, I don't understand that. We won't know what's going to happen with any of this until it happens. I'll give you an example. President Trump was never supposed to do anything for California, but now President Trump is meeting with Governor Newsom. So what are we really talking about here, other than the fact that we're applying for grant money and we don't know if we're going to get it or not? All I have to say about this.
And I have nothing further, but I do really appreciate having you back there, Laura, and keeping an eye on everything for us. And I'm going to remain hopeful. So thank you for attending tonight. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And now back to our regularly scheduled programming. Item 7, Human Resources Report, will do on Tuesday.
Correct, President Sewell.
Moving on to action items. Item 8, we'll have a public hearing on Tuesday, and that will be for Ordinance 2025-01, establishing a procedure for property owner objections to proposed water and sewer fees or special assessments. It is recommended that the Board of Directors adopt Ordinance number 2025-01, establishing a procedure for property owners' objections to proposed water, sewer fees of special assessments. General Manager?
Thank you, President Sewell. I know in the past, when we have a public hearing, we try to put everything on the record, but we do have a PowerPoint presentation if the board would like to see that today. And then you'll see it again on Tuesday as part of the public hearing. Yep.
That 2257. 218, Prop 218. Thank you, President Sewell, General Manager Macy. Today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the ordinance based on the Assembly Bill 2257, which addresses the implementation of an objection procedure to our Prop 218 process. Next slide, please. Prop 218 has long been a source of uncertainty and legal challenges for water agencies. The proposition's protest and ballot assessment procedures were once viewed as required administrative remedies by various agencies. However, the courts have ruled consistently rejecting the administrative exhaustion defense under previous law. The legal requirement led to the creation of AB 2257, which the Aqua agencies authored, which authorizes local agencies to adopt administrative exhaustion procedures in Prop 218 rulemaking and special assessment proceedings. The goal of AB 2257 is to provide a clear and more defensible framework for water agencies to follow that mitigates the risks associated with Prop 218 lawsuits. By establishing a formal objective procedure that runs parallel with Prop 218, protest hearings, or special assessment ballots proceedings, AB 2257 aims to streamline the administrative process and reduce potential litigation costs. Next slide. Implementing AB 2257 requires a series of well-defined steps that ensure compliance with the new procedures while maintaining the core principles of Prop 218. The first step is what we're here doing today, establishing a process by adopting an ordinance. We will continue to have public participation. That's a fundamental aspect of Prop 218 and is a central democratic process of water management. AB 2257 reinforces this principle by ensuring that stakeholders have ample opportunities to voice their concerns and objections throughout the administrative process. By fostering an environment of transparency and open dialogue, AB 2257 helps build trust between water agencies and the communities we serve.
The exhaustion process established by 2257 is modeled on the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA process. This model provides a structured and systematic approach to addressing objections and ensuring that all administrative remedies are exhausted before litigation can proceed. The 6-step process outlined on the screen ensures that water agencies follow a consistent and transparent approach to rate making and special assessment proceedings. I'm going to go back. I'm sorry. There's 6 steps here. And as I mentioned before, step 1 is adopting either an ordinance or a resolution. And we chose the ordinance route. And that's what we're here doing today. Step 2 would require a notice. That would be something that we would do as part of our Prop 218. We would include notification as well regarding this remedy as well. Step 3, we would have 45 days to collect objections. Step 4, we would actually prepare those objections into one document, similar to a CEQA document, where each objection would be answered. Step 5 would be a public hearing where we would take that document out to the public and we would air that out in a public hearing scenario. And then step 6 would go along with back to your Prop 218 process where we could actually adopt. Go ahead and back one. So this timeline right here shows you how that would work. You can see the AB 2257 steps right there along the top and the Prop 218 along the bottom. The 45 days in the protest period or the objection period is right there in the middle, and you can see it all runs seamlessly right at the same time. One notice with both information and Prop 218 notification, and then at the end when you go to adopt, they meet back at the end as well. As I mentioned, this timeline works very well. It's been vetted by the other aqua agencies before it was adopted. It's a very clear and precise timeline that can help us mitigate the risk associated with Prop 218 lawsuits in the future. And I know that you've been provided a copy of the legal ordinance that our council did prepare. And I'm here for any questions now, or you can hold them for Tuesday.
Any questions or comments, Director Martin?
No.
Director Meyer-Hoppin?
I'm going to hold mine for Tuesday so I can make it longer in one sentence.
And I just want to say, I won't, if there are any legal questions, I won't be here on Tuesday. So if you have any for me today, today would be the opportunity.
Then I'll ask now. I do have a legal question. The 6 steps that were put up here, thank you for bringing it up. This modeled on CEQA process. Isn't with or without CEQA, isn't this the legal process that we normally have to take anyhow?
It's modeled after that, but the process that's laid out that Ms. Champion discussed is now laid out in the government code, and which became the provisions became effective January 1 of this year. And so we are following that process exactly that's in the new law that's been adopted. And this this is a great thing for the district, I think, and for the community, because it gives the community, it lays out a process for them if they have objections to not just object, but state the reason in writing that they're objecting, and then a back and forth process where the district responds to the basis for their objection. In the past, it was just they would submit an objection and that's it, a protest. But this requires, if they want to challenge the rates, that they explain what their objection is, and then we respond to that before the rates are adopted. But it's all laid out in the new government code section step by step, and we're following that with this ordinance.
Thank you for that clarification. And as you know, I like to do it by the book, and I appreciate that we're doing it that way.
Director Duff?
Thank you for hearing us at the conference and bringing this so quickly.
Vice President? And I'll just ditto that too. It's a huge topic, the last aqua, and I appreciate the speed in which we're moving forward with this. Thank you. Item 9, adoption of MSWD Artificial Intelligence Policy number 2025-01. General Manager?
Thank you, President Sewell. Assistant General Manager Marion Champion will take the Marion.
Thank you again, President Sewell, members of the board. Today, I'm following up on the draft artificial intelligence or AI policy that was presented at the this month's workshop. Specifically, we'll discuss its purpose, key points, and guidelines for how we'll implement it to our employees. That really the purpose of this policy is to provide clear and precise guidance for reasonable and ethical use of AI tools within MSWD. Recognizing that AI technology is advancing at an unprecedented rate and becoming increasingly integrated into our daily functions, it's really become important that we deploy these tools to enhance efficiency, foster innovation, and support decision-making processes while safeguarding the privacy of our customers and our employees. By enacting this policy, we aim to foster trust and accountability in our AI usage and aligning with our mission. As I mentioned at the workshop, this was originally made possible because of the administration code, section 5. We actually adopted use of AI. We added that into our code. And so this is actually just following up with that adoption of language there. In that we had given the authority to the general manager or his designee to bring back this policy today, and we are following up with that. The key points here of the policy is that it's going to extend to all employees, contractors, and partners of MSWD, encompassing all and existing future AI tools. We have drafted language to incorporate this into our contract templates, which we are having legal review right now, and that will address the use of AI also by our contractors. MSWD will explicitly define prohibited uses of AI in this policy. That includes anything, employment related. We cannot use it or classified information. And really, it's a tool that's not supposed to be making decisions, but it's just to aid us in our decision making. If you look at the key points, this is what some of the information will be going out to our employees when we do this. I want to give them some easy do's and don'ts. The do's include, we'll be providing one observation I wanted to back up a little bit. One observation that staff has made is that sometimes when we're using AI, we don't even realize as employees that we're using it. When you go to a website and you type in a question to Google, a lot of times Google Assist or something like that will come in and it'll give you an answer. So as part of the rollout of this policy, we really want to make sure that employees realize that they are sometimes using AI, whether they realize it or not. And so this is why it's really important that we give them the do's and the don'ts. So looking at the do's, we want to encourage employees to familiarize themselves with AI tools, again, so they recognize when they're getting those AI responses online that they see that. We want them to also be very transparent with them. They should be able to they should be disclosing this to their supervisors and letting others know that their work has been guided by AI. Employees are also urged to ask questions and seek support for any aspect of AI. We've got a great resource in our IT department, and I feel very confident that if employees have questions, they can reach out to them. We also want to make sure that the security risks are always reported to IT anytime that there's any issues there. And it's really imperative that we're using AI responsibly and adhering to our established policy. Some of the don'ts include that we want to emphasize the importance of adhering to the policy and provide guidance to ensure ethical and reasonable usage. We want to encourage all employees to embrace AI responsibly and ethically while maintaining the highest standards of integrity. We now and with that, I'd like to open up the floor for any questions.
Any questions, Director Martin?
Just an observation. It would be interesting on any project that we have to get an answer or a procedure from AI and see how it compares to the decisions that we're making without AI. And I would just find that fascinating to do that. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
I'll keep that in mind. I might be able to find a case study at some point in time.
There you go.
Bring it to you.
Director Martin?
Yes, I imagine some point in time in the future that will come up. It's just, I'm glad you're on top of this. I remember about 4 years ago, I used to hang out in the jacuzzi with a friend, or a sauna actually, and he was talking about algorithms and AI 4 years ago. And just in the last years, it's fascinating how fast it's growing and how they were able to put all this information together. It's really about as mind-boggling as having a phone in your computer. Yeah, it's,
in your pocket.
it just keeps on going. So thank you for keeping up on it. And it's going to be quite a little bit of an undertaking to get all the employees to understand where they're at when they're on social media or doing things for the district here with the computers. So it's very important. Thank you.
Director Duff.
Again, great work. Thank you. And thank you for reviewing it. I have a little concern, and I know we've kind of briefly spoken about it, but since I have IT here as well, I just want to bring it up. So I was on a Zoom board meeting call with another agency, and the GM was sharing a cautionary tale with everyone. And he told them that, be careful, everybody. I was trying out an AI, and he didn't state which one he had tried out, but he had contracted a AI STD. And everyone was like, what are you talking about? And he basically, the AI that he had used as a sample had embedded itself into his system. And for the last 60 days had attended every Zoom, every meeting, had recorded it and transcribed it all. And he was completely unawares. And some of those were employee confidential meetings, et cetera. They had to dispose of it and remove it from the systems and document its destruction, et cetera, et cetera. It ended up being a lot bigger of a deal than he had intended. So with that cautionary tale that I'm sharing, are you going to potentially tell employees there are certain AI products that you are not to use on MSWD equipment? Will you be evaluating those and keeping a close eye on how it starts to interact and which tools the employees start to use?
I believe I know what STD that was. Um, and I am blocking that. We have some policies in place that prevent things from like that from attaching to people's accounts, and for that exact reason, because that one, and there are probably some others that work like it. It's almost like a virus. You attend a meeting and then informs everyone that you attended the meeting with, hey, here's a summary, get access to it. And then next thing you know, a few clicks later, it's now part of your account as well, doing the same thing. So we do have some protections in place to stop that from happening automatically.
Okay.
But I think probably maybe we could talk about updating the policy or adding some guidance to staff.
Share the cautionary tale, make sure that they're protecting their devices, et cetera. But yeah, I wanted to make that one comment, in that I'm concerned that we're opening the doors to all without each one being vetted. So I'm hopeful that as we work through the details, we'll integrate both of those. Thank you so much.
Yes, we are actually putting together a pilot group, and we're looking at doing something more of a within the district so that the information is not being shared outside. We can do things like control the tone. I think you heard a little bit about this during the conference, but we can control the tone and the branding and the speech. But like I said, we are creating a pilot group that will be power users in the very beginning. And then once we've vetted it, we know it's safe, then we can roll it out to more users.
Vice President.
I think they have computer condoms to help reduce the risk. Maybe we should look into it. I have nothing. Thank you.
Along the lines of Director Duff's, is there going to be any kind of like training for all employees once that pilot group kind of sorts things out?
We will first roll it out as probably just digital to all of our employees, like the policy and some do's and don'ts. And then once we actually get ready to offer it to more employees, then we would do specific user training with them.
And then the pilot group is like right now, is it up to individual users whether they want to have a paid account or use this AI versus another AI, or are we trying to recommend one that maybe do like an organizational so many users? And
that's exactly what we're looking at, the organizational. And I know Kurt's already done a couple times. He's sent out information district wide, kind of getting people to be safe and to be careful. He also has some restrictions like there, I won't name which one, but there's one of the automatic note takers that shows up on a lot of our meetings that I've been on with you for our Rotary board. That one is blocked. I tried to download it myself and I got stuck there. And so Kurt's already got a employees. So now we're just getting that policy so that now we can all follow it as a district. And this is what gives us the authority now to be able to kind of start implementing those next steps with our employees.
Great.
Kurt,
Thank you.
Kurt, do you feel comfortable talking about Copilot and how we're going to, how that reduces our risk for the users that we purchase, and how we're going to have the pilot group use Copilot to start that process and then implement it district-wide?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about that. We're in the early stages of that, but Copilot being a Microsoft product, it says in their pretty plain language, it's limited to just your data. They capture, they don't share it, they don't train their models on your data. And then there are also some additional ways that you can further lock down what Copilot has access to in your own systems. So, you can ask it about documents and ask it about data, but if you have locked down certain areas, it won't have any idea that those even exist. So, being that it's a Microsoft product, you have control that you don't have over things like ChatGPT and Grok and, all the other ones out there.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions for me?
I have one additional thing. In the future, any procedure, policy, thing that is generated with the use of AI, I would like to make sure that each of those decisions that are generated by indicate that in the decision on there, that it's AI termination, rather than, so that we all know what generated this decision to move forward in this direction.
So right now, the way our policy reads is that AI should not be making the decision. It can aid you and give you guidance towards a decision, but still the human touch. We still want those human eyes on the information before a decision gets made.
Couldn't we also add on that this decision was based on information provided by AI?
I'm sure we could.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if I agree with that.
That's okay, Ted.
Yeah, it's all right. Our decisions, as Assistant General Manager Champion said, should be based on our own decision, because some of this information that they're gathering could be coming from Florida or the Midwest or wherever. So we need to make our own decisions rather than to be posting that maybe AI is making them for us, or they're leading people to misinterpret that. For instance, are you using now is the staff as a whole using any AI programs now for when they write a paragraph about something, or and does the district have one program that they want everybody to use?
And that's the co-pilot one that Kurt just
Co-pilot?
mentioned that we are starting to implement. We're creating a pilot group to start that. I will tell you from my own personal experience, I'm using it for things like a social media post or even help me with a press release. But even those, you still have to go in and you have to refine it and you have to go back in and rework it. So I would say it's still work product for the district. It's not, we're not using it it's not at the point, AI is not at the point where I would feel confident just saying, write me a press release on X, Y, and Z, and then going out without really reviewing it and taking a look at it.
If you really look at what's being written, you can tell when somebody's using AI, because it just doesn't, the information is there, but it's all over the chart kind of, because there's so many different ways you can express one sentence. And so that it's going to be an ongoing thing.
I think this is going to continue to evolve, and you'll probably have us back here to update this policy quite frequently.
But probably I'll be looking forward to it. I hope you are.
Thank you, Marion.
Thank you.
Item 10, award of contract to Borden Excavating Incorporated for GQPP Assessment District 18 Area D3 Sewer Construction and Waterline Replacement Project and Capital Budget Augmentation. It is recommended that the general manager be authorized to award a contract for the GQPP Area Assessment 18 Area D3 Sewer Construction and Waterline Replacement Project to the lowest responsible bidder, Borden Excavating Incorporated, in the amount of $5,252,252 plus a 10% contingency. Augment the capital improvement budget amount to $1,820,622.20 for job number 11876, and to do all things necessary to complete the project, including but not limited to preparation and filing of a notice of exemption to comply with CEQA requirements. General Manager.
Thank you, President Sewell, members of the board. This particular project we brought to the workshop originally, and we're talking about what if the bids came in higher than what we anticipated as the engineer's estimate. And then we talked about if that does happen, how does the board feel about maybe reducing part of the project only during certain streets? We also talked about putting the water main. There's rear yard easements in this case. There's 4-inch rear yard easements. Typically, the board policy in the last year has been we want to move those when we can. This would be one of those projects where it's appropriate to move the water lines in the roadway, provide a better fire flow for the residents, but also reduce our risk for having rear yard easements, as well as some of the issues that happen with just maintaining a water main in the backyards. So from that perspective, what's in front of you is simply to reward the construction contract, but it gets a little bit deeper in that because the bids did come in higher than we expected. I'm just going to set this up and then I'll let Eric go through it in a little bit more detail. But when we bid the project, we're only paving the street once, but we have 2 utilities going in the road. If this was just a sewer project, we probably wouldn't be bringing the project to you because it wouldn't be cost effective, as we were talking about before. So you'll see in front of you, you'll see paving as part of the sewer, and then you'll see paving as part of the water. The thought being that the water goes in second, and then after you do the water main, then you do all the paving. So we have a reason to bring it all into the water and then hopefully show that maybe we can move forward with the sewer. So with that being said, Eric, you want to go through the spreadsheet comparing what the cost of the project is and how much revenue we're getting from grant and AD assessment district proceeds.
Yes, thank you, General Manager Macy. Good afternoon, President Sewell and members of the board. This will be a back and forth type of discussion. We've been working on this for a while, and we're very confident in these numbers. As General Manager Macy said, the sewer will go in first, and then after that, the water line at a higher elevation above the sewer will go in after that. So I say that because we have 2 different scenarios here. When the contractor submitted his bid from Borden, we also included in the bid documents that they include paving expenses. So they initially, the paving expenses were applied under the sewer project. I'm sorry. Okay. So this covers, and I'm highlighting the cells now. This is the sewer side. So in going through this project here, this scenario number 1, we had the paving under the sewer. And then this project covers construction, contingency, design, all these things, inspection, geotech. And the total project cost is about, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing this.
Would you like me to take over and go through it real quick?
I'm sorry.
Okay, I can go through it then. I'll go through it pretty quickly.
That's why we're in.
Yep.
Yeah. I'd be nearsighted too if I sat there with all them numbers all day.
Okay. Thank you. Just before also I continue, I'd like to do a quick shout out to General Manager Macy, as well as Teresa Murphy, our engineering technician, and Daniel Friend, our Director of Operations. We cranked on these numbers pretty hard. So with the paving costs in the sewer budget. It equates to $3.2 million. Now, the approved budget that we have is 2.3. Well, that leaves an overage or a deficit of $871,000. But now we're going to take a look at the connection fees as well as so the total project cost is 3.2. With the connection fees, it now goes to $3.4 million. The grant, $951,000, coupled with the connection fees and the proceeds from the construction costs, equate to $1.7 million still over. So there's 102 lots. And based on the difference between the costs and the benefits, it equates to about $33,000 per lot, meaning that MSWD would need to contribute about $33,000 per lot to get this project completed. Just as a side note, when Assessment District 18 was initially set up per the engineer's report, it came out to about $8,000. So that includes construction, and that would be the assessed cost applied to all the parcels. So therefore, that leaves a $16,000 cost that the district would need to come up with. Please.
So yeah, let me clarify a little bit. When we're talking about the Assessment District 18 proceeds and 50% of the costs and 50% of the connection fees, that is based on what the voters voted on when we took it to them. And when we were looking at that document even today, the reason we're bringing this up is because we realized that the maximum amount of assessment value is for a single family unit is just over $8,000. So when you're looking at a total cost of 3.2 million divided by 102, it's a lot more than that. And that's sort of what we're trying to show here is we knew when the bids came in that we were not going to have the proceeds from just the AD1 as well as the grant total. Looking at just the numbers as they look in front of you right now, that difference is almost $1.7 million. From a policy perspective, we could move forward, take it out of some of the property tax revenue that is general fund and move forward. However, we have never subsidized an assessment district to this level, especially for this number of units. So that's why when we moved the paving as part of the water and we started looking through it, the numbers got a little bit better. If you look at that column that he's addressing right now, you see the budget balance of just around $5,000. That's total. So when you're going through the numbers, you still, because of the way the assessment district was set up, having a maximum of $8,000, yet the per lot cost is being $25,000, there's still a difference of $7,000. So even if we were to move all of the paving into the water, you're still looking at an roughly an $800,000 difference between revenue and expenses. So why the item in front of you is a construction contract, it's also a policy decision by the board of subsidizing an assessment district. And more importantly, also being aware that all of 18 was set up with these parameters. And as we move forward and start getting additional resources, we may want to look, instead of being a 50-50 is what our assumption was. For the most part, that was with core dollars. And core dollars is 75.50, and then you put the core charges on top of it. It gets it closer to that, but it gives us a little bit more freedom because it also can include other things. This particular assessment district was the way it was set up, and then the funding option, which was the grant, doesn't cover the connection charge. Now, fast forward into M2, which we'll be bringing to you down the road. That particular grant covers all the project as well as the connection abatement costs. So it depends. The grant has a lot to do with how these numbers fall out. So again, why we brought it to you as a workshop, showing you what some of the scenarios are. We now have the scenarios, and we now realize that we are going to have to subsidize this more than we've ever subsidized another project, and it's a board decision from that perspective. The construction contract that's in front of you, pretty straightforward. The load job, we move forward. But this is really the nuts and bolts of why this item is to you and why we're presenting it this way, is because we realize it's a policy decision in how we move forward with these assessment districts, knowing that more than likely all of them are going to be underfunded because they were all done 8 or 9 years ago.
Construction costs have increased as well.
Correct. So
And could I just
go
add
ahead,
as well?
please.
When we did this through the workshop, there was a lot of discussion on should we do this street? Should we do, if we only get funding for this? This would be the entire.
Yes, as we were looking into it and trying to come up with other options, why we were hoping that the proceeds are what the proceeds are per lot. And when we were looking at the grant, hoping that there were other things such as connection fees, it could be it was also per lot. So if we reduce the number of lots, it doesn't change the bottom line of cost per lot. So that's why, and I thank you for that question, because it does tie into why we're showing per lot difference, because it doesn't change whether we do 1 lot or 102. So I don't know if I guess right now we'd like to hear any questions you have. If there's any additional information we'd like us to present to maybe change this. We do not have to make a decision on the construction contract. We have up to 90 days to make that decision. There is a timing hook on one of the smaller grants that are associated with this, but I think the total grant is 75,000. 75,000 when you're talking about maybe up to an $800,000 commitment may or may not play into the ultimate decision of whether we move forward with the project. So just trying to get all the information to the board that we can, so we can make a good decision or make an informed decision, I guess. So at this point, any questions related to this or anything of moving forward with the project and past practice would be helpful for us.
Okay. Any questions from the board, Director Martin?
No.
Director Meyer?
Yes. If we subsidize this, but let's just say we take these numbers you have here now, and we just say, okay, there's not going to be any grants coming in. So we're going to subsidize X amount of dollars. After they're hooked up, how long will it take us to get this money back from those connections? You understand what I'm going?
Well, so I think I do understand. So our monthly, what we would receive from the monthly, I believe, would be $650 per year.
Mhm.
Per year. So 650 per year times 100. So if my math is correct, that would be $65,000 a year. So to rate of return on an $800,000 investment, it would take some time.
Yeah, that's the problem I'm having. I'm all for helping out our residents the best we can to get them hooked up. But it's going to be a burden on not only the district like this, but it could be a burden on the district if we don't get that grant money, and it could be a burden on the homeowner.
Correct. And looking at this, we always talk about a 50-50. That's the way it was set up. The cost of construction exceeded that 50-50, and that's why we're having to look at more. Now we can wait and try to get more grant funding and try to make these numbers look a little bit better. But right now we don't have that. There is some other opportunities. We're looking at possibly $4 million in our next round of work plan from the Corps. We could start talking about this project being part of that. Now we'd have to go out and rebid the project, because by the time we get that award and get that into our letter agreement, or we could extend the bids. Go ahead.
So, you said we have 90 days. So would it be to our benefit to wait another 60 days to see what other grant money, so we have a better idea of where we're at? Or
that is an option, but we usually have a pretty good idea of what grant monies are available to us now and where these are in the sequence. And we don't see anything in the next 60 days that would come to us that we wouldn't already have allocated to another project or not be applicable to this. So right now, we believe that the grant monies that we have received or been allocated towards us for this purpose are included in this number.
okay. My next, it's a suggestion really for engineering, since the water district, and I really appreciate it, and I'm sure Councilmember Pai does too, that we're working together with the city for the road repairs and that kind of thing. At the same time, I'm sure that Mr. Friend has all the knowledge as to what kind of problems you may run into as far as code enforcement, with people having stuff in the alley or out in the street that may hinder the job. So my suggestion is to get a hold of the city, let them know what area you're going to, and ask them if there's any code enforcement violations or anything that may, like I said, Mr. Friend knows how to put it in better words than I do, and I think he understands what I'm saying. So that when you guys, when MSWD goes there to do this work, everything's cleared, ready to go, so there's no delays.
Part of our pre-construction meeting would do exactly that. We would sit down with the city, their code enforcement, other utilities, and make sure that everybody's on the same page, understands the construction sequence. So that would be part of our normal operating procedure.
Okay, and that time period from that meeting to when you're going to do it would be how long?
What, from the pre-construction meeting to actually starting construction?
Yes.
Usually those are tied together anywhere from 30 to 90 days. It's usually right before they start the project.
Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but and that get those code violations taken care of. Anyways, that's the general idea. Hopefully that's helpful.
No, thank you.
Director Duff?
A couple questions. When does the $75,000 grant expire?
March 31st.
Thank you. When does the assessment district expire?
December 2029.
Thank you. And I know that our staff prioritized the septic to sewer conversions based on a lot of factors, age and location and et cetera. Can just remind me for this particular area, is this one of the ones built in the 60s? Is this one of the ones built in the 70s? Where does this lie as far as how old the septics are?
In terms of I don't know about the septic, but I do know the water lines that are in the alleys were built in late 1960s.
So that's probably a good reference of when the
Yeah.
septic tanks were also constructed.
I appreciate those answers. And then I have a couple questions for you regarding the construction contract itself, so we can discuss those offline.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Vice President?
Okay, I wasn't here for that workshop, so I'm a little confused about some stuff. Paving is part of sewer, paving is part of water. I don't understand how this isn't making any sense to me. You're putting more in there. Explain to me, so encroachment permit is $10,000 for, can you tell me exactly what that is?
Well, in order to perform utility improvements in the public right of way, like on Cactus or 12th Street, we estimate that the city of DHS would require a contribution or a cost from MSWD in $10,000 to apply for an encroachment permit, and then those encroachment permit costs cover inspection time and effort from the city of DHS, and they also come out and make sure where the work is being performed within the public right of way to replace the pavement, the roadway surface, according to DHS's details and specifications.
Is that I mean, we would be doing this kind of not simultaneously, but consecutively, right? So if you open the street up, you're not going to close this, pave it and then reopen it for water. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So would we need 2 encroachment permits?
We're just splitting the assumed cost of $20,000 between 2 projects.
Okay, that would have been nice to put it that way. Because when I look at this, I think, why are we paying twice for all of this stuff at the bottom? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm looking and I'm like, well, gee, let's cut out 10,000. If it's 10,000 for one encroachment permit and we're opening the road up, why not do it? I have a concern about the fact that we're looking at close to $787,000 that we're going to be on the hook for. So are other ratepayers subsidizing this project would be the question.
I would look at it as almost the water line. the, or even the conversation I was talking about where we all pay into the water fund and this specific water line improvement only impacts the ones here, but it also infrastructure all throughout the city. So you're paying into the water fund. Now, going back to the sewer fund, yes, if we were to subsidize, if we were to pay the extra 800,000, you're absolutely right. We would pay that cost from all of our wastewater ratepayers. Now, there are other funds, property taxes and things like that, that are general fund items that are more, that don't have the restrictions specifically to the water or sewer that we could look at. I don't know exactly how much we have in the general fund from property tax available to take all this, but that would be our discretionary funds. But typically, my answer to you would be absolutely, it would come from all of our wastewater customers, not just the 102 that are in these residences.
And so I know Prop 218 tells us we cannot charge somebody else for the water we use. Does that apply to water we flush?
I guess the answer, the way I would answer that question is if a developer came in and said, I could not develop an area, we would not be allowed to use that ratepayer money to extend one of our sewers to their property. We'd not be able to do something like that. So very similarly, we're doing the same thing in this particular application where we're extending our system to the benefit of others that are not our wastewater ratepayers.
Which in legal terms is a no.
That's what I'm saying. It's, to answer your question, you're absolutely right. We would be spreading that cost if it was coming from our wastewater fund and not our general fund that has less restrictions. That's why I want to verify that we have the $780,000.
Yeah, so I mean, there's nothing I would not even consider it if that's the case. Here comes your next dilemma is, so now you've done it for this area. And moving forward, when we say we don't have enough money to fix your area, and we have had a constituent here who complained about having to have her tank pumped frequently. And well, you're low on the list, you're all the way down here and we're not getting them done because we don't have the money. What do you say to those people? Because but you paid for theirs. So are we gonna give this $7,000 equally among every property that we do moving forward in the future is my question.
That is a board decision, and that's why we're having this discussion today. Past practice, we have done this once. It was 300,000, and I believe it was for 300 properties. Not this one. It has a lot higher cost per lot. If you're from a practical perspective, I don't know that staff can recommend this project moving forward, but we weren't going to do that without having buy-in from the board. That's not necessarily our decision, whether we use other unrestricted funds to take on these types of projects and make policy. So if you're asking me what my recommendation is about this particular
No,
project.
I'm not asking.
Okay.
I'm asking the questions to ascertain what I know what I'm going to say.
Okay.
But to delineate the fact that what we are in effect asking is for other people to pay
Yes.
for 102 homes. 300,000 for 300 homes to me is a reasonable ask. Close to $1 million for 100 homes to me is not a reasonable ask. In terms of grants, just for Director Meyerhoffen's perspective, I would not count on any grant money for 4 years. That's just me. I would assume that we're probably not going to get anything. And then if we do, let's be happy about it. But given that we did have a big ask last year, and what did we end up getting?
0.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Just to kind of play the other side of this, the 300,000, 300 homes, what year was that? 19 or something?
No,
I meant 2019. Sorry.
Time. Yeah.
Back in the,
You know what? We'll get that. Yeah, we'll get back to you
2018.
with the true year, but yes, it was sometime in the 2000 and teens timeframe.
I was off by a year, not 100. But the almost $1 million that we have in grants towards this, did those ever sunset or go away? Or are those?
Well, the $76,000, there's two grants. The $76,000 grant will sunset March 31st. And then the other one, June 30th next year. Thank you, sir.
And that's that line 951, 988.
Yeah.
Well, minus
minus the 78.
Yeah.
$875,000 expires June 30th of next year.
And who's is that? That's the core.
Prop one round one, and then there's Prop one round two.
They're both state of California grants.
So I guess, although I'm not happy to see that difference, if we wait and lose 850,000, then we're really much further behind than I. Did you have something? Go ahead. Why?
Given my experience with the state, that means that 855,000 will never enter our pockets until 2027 or 2028. So what you're in effect asking us to do is either get a line of credit like we've done, or put out $1 million of our own money plus 787,000. That's close to $2 million. Because if it's state grant, that means we do it first, they reimburse afterwards. And we know there's going to be cost overruns that we're going to have to put out. So you're looking at $2 million of our money. And if you've got that, okay, but that's state grants. I don't rely on them.
One thing we can do in preparation for Tuesday's meeting is we can look through that grant to see if there's any other options or any other grant funding that's potential to help this particular project. But we'll work through that between now and Tuesday.
Okay. I'm just thinking of if we weren't to move forward, the cost of this in the future is, I think, going to be even much worse than that. And realistically, I think that assessment district is going to go away and we'd have to reassess and not be a 50-50. There's a lot to think about.
Can I also ask that one more thing? When you're looking at the grant, can you look at if it can be used on other things too? If this project is something that at this point in time, as terrible as it is to say out loud, isn't feasible, it would be nice if we could find a way to save that grant money and put it to use somewhere if that's possible. But if it's specifically tied to this specific assessment district, then that would change things too. Thank you.
Usually there is a clause in the grant that talks about beneficial use or some specific use or benefit to the public. And that's how we get scored and that's how we obtain these. So we'll go through that process and look to see if there's any other ways that we can use that money to our benefit.
And another question, I'm sorry, I don't have our capital improvement thing memorized. We have set aside money for the rear yard easement removals. And that's a 10-year, 20-year project to remove everything. I mean,
it was actually closer to a 30-year project. It was about a $64 million line item if we were to remove all of them. And we spread that over 30 years. They put $2 million each year. Now that number may change as we start looking at the long range financial plan, because what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make sure that we have enough revenue to cover that yearly cost. But that's what we had in our mind and how we're setting it up for the, that's how we're starting the master plans. When we did the water and the sewer, we talked about those replacements, and that was part of that total, if you will. It's actually two different benefits. One, the rear yard easements is one of them, but a lot of them are some of the older pipe that we talked about replacing anyway. So it actually serves dual purposes. So when you saw the master plan, gosh, at this point, almost a year ago, we had in there line replacement because pipe was getting over 50 years old. Some of it was 75 or 70 years old and things of that nature. So we were looking to replace a certain linear feet of pipe every single year. But again, it goes to, do we have the revenue to pay those? And that's where the long range financial plan comes in.
I guess just looking at it at a higher perspective, again, when you're looking at it a per lot basis, it doesn't seem quite fair, like you've mentioned. But at a higher perspective, our goal to abate all of our septic tanks is a big priority for me, and I think the entire board, as well as our capital improvement of moving those water lines. I'd hate to see all the work done up to this point to get the grant funds and get the assessment districts passed, to look back in 5 years and say, man, I really wish we would have done that 800,000. Because I think, as we've seen, just from those 300 homes in 2018, the price is really skyrocketing. But anything further? We'll beat this horse on Tuesday. Item 11, board acceptance of a contract change order with JF Shea for the construction of the Nancy Wright Regional Wastewater Reclamation Facility. It is recommended that the general manager be authorized to execute a contract change order with JF Shea Construction Incorporated for additional costs due to unforeseen tasks and field issues during construction of the Nancy Wright Regional Water Reclamation Facility in the amount of $1,698,569. General manager.
Thank you, President Sewell. This item has been discussed a couple of different times, workshops, a study session, as well as at our last board meeting. So the board instructed staff to meet with the contractor one more time to see if we could continue to negotiate and possibly reduce the change order. We did meet with the contractor. At that point, we were informed that that was the number, that they did not feel comfortable that they could sharpen their pencil anymore. With that being said, we then wanted to make sure that all of the questions that were asked from the board were appropriately answered. There were some things that we did not have with us at our last board meeting that were specific to, let's say, markups and how was the money divided once we reduced the costs and things of that nature. So we worked with the contractor, our construction management team, TKE, worked with the contractor to come up with responses. We have provided that to the board. It's here at the dais, as well as copies provided for the public as well. I would ask TKE to come up and go over that document. We have a short presentation that summarizes the memo that you've also received. Steve?
Good afternoon, President Sewell, members of the board. So as General Manager Macy set up, we went through the transcripts from the study session and the board meeting and the board workshop from last month and did our best to excerpt any questions that were asked and put together the memo that's in front of you, trying our best to answer those and provide additional context. You know, when we came to you last month, it's hard to roll up 2.5 years of work, multiple discussions and all that into something presentable to the board. So we presented kind of the light version, or scratch the surface. And then that's why we wanted to go back, take all those questions and try to provide answers to the board to give you that additional information and provide some additional context on the decision-making process and maybe some of the steps that transpired through construction that got us to the answer. So with that, I have a presentation today. I tried my best to kind of pull out some of the relevant information from the 10-page memo in front of you and put it into a bulletized list. I don't intend to go through all the bullets, but just try to give you some of the background as to what some of that decision-making process was as we went through it. So next slide, please. Regarding PCO 38, again, the original change order request was for $295,107. That was negotiated down to $220,889 for about $74,000 cost reduction. The contract documents included the mitigation, monitoring, and reporting program from our approved CEQA document, and that had 2 different requirements when it comes to sensitive species. The first being that desert tortoise and burrowing owl must be surveyed 30 days prior to starting any work on site. And the second, that we go out specifically within 3 days of any ground disturbing activities and do a native bird species survey. At the start of construction, the original desert tortoise and burrowing owl survey was done on March 24th, 2022 for the entire 60-acre site, even though we're not working on the entire 60-acre site, and they found no burrows and no desert tortoise. However, when it came time to work in the southern portion of the project, where no ground disturbing activities had occurred for roughly the first year of construction, they did find that burrowing owl on site. So the contractor did what was required of them. They adhered to the requirements that Mission Springs and our CEQA document stipulated, but we have no control over preventing birds from creating habitat on our site. And that's what occurred about a year after the start of construction. I also wanted to note that there were 9 different surveys done throughout the roughly the main 2-year portion of construction. So the biologists were out there 9 different times looking at different areas to make sure they were clear for construction to start. So it wasn't just these 2. There were 7 additional. They just didn't find anything. Part of the basis of our negotiation was really kind of digging into the earthwork quantity numbers and really trying to focus that in on just what was impacted by the bird. There's 3 spreading ponds at the south end of the site, and the bird burrowing owl was in one of them. The most westerly one. So we tried to really focus our efforts onto, okay, what impact did that have, and how did it relate to the earthwork activities? You can go to the next slide. So the table on the left includes costs, total cost of earthworks throughout the project. And those were highlighted in orange. And what we did is go back and look at that, and what aspects of the earthwork were actually attributed to just the basins and the areas where they were impacted by the burrowing owl. So that led to a pretty substantial decrease on the earthwork quantities, the cubic yardage quantities, which in turn resulted in a cost decrease I don't recall the number, of $74,000 and change. And then we also included the markup down here at the bottom, because we did identify a markup error on the first presentation of the change order, where there was a 15% material markup and then another 5% G&A markup, but that was corrected, and the total markup was again limited to 15%, excuse me, on the revised change order, which is consistent with the approved contract documents. Next slide. So for PCO, our potential change order 80 was overall time-related impacts. This one started out at a cost of about 1.57 million, and it was negotiated down to 1.1 million for a cost reduction of about $464,000. A project of this scope and over this period of time, it goes through several ebbs and flows, and a project of this magnitude is expected to incur changes throughout the course. But as those occur, we're not exactly sure what impact that may have to the overall project schedule or different areas of work that have not started yet. So the typical process when there was an identified potential impact to the schedule, contract would submit a formal letter to the district saying, hey, there's a change on the project and we feel it may impact the timeline, and we're going to continue to monitor it, and we'll discuss it and negotiate it at the end of the project. So what this does is, again, all these bullets for changes that result in additional time, it's going through and it's really trying to summarize the overall impacts from all the different changes on the project and put them into under one cover. Ultimately, it came down to about 5,400 man hours of additional work for the contractor and his team. That equates to about 2.5 full-time employees over a 1-year period. Ultimately, we negotiated that down and ended up with about 2,800 additional man hours were required on the project. So in essence, we were able to negotiate out 1 full-time employee's worth of work for an entire year. But that's really where we tried to focus our efforts. And again, trying to get down to, okay, what days were actually impacted and what was the total time that took you in addition to the project. We looked at things like critical path, material procurement, and how did all that kind of play into it. Next slide. Regarding our electrical subcontractor, so this was just a pass-through for JFJ. Their subcontractor was Baker Electric. They had about $206,000 for their own TRO for their additional time on the project, and that was kept separate from JFJ so we can negotiate them separately. The primary impact on their schedule was getting the motor control centers for the electrical system, the electrical equipment that runs all the pumps on the treatment plant. There was supply chain disruptions coming out of COVID. That really has played an impact to that entire industry and the microchip industry, and that still has not subsided, and we're facing that on several other projects. But it doesn't quite qualify for a force majeure scenario, but it really wasn't the contractor's fault, the subcontractor's fault. It really wasn't the district's fault. So we did our best just to work with them and figure out, okay, how can we settle on this? JFJ agreed to waive their 5% markup on it, and then the contractor agreed to split their costs with us just so we could put it to bed and walk away, knowing that if we wanted to fight it out, it would probably cost a lot more than it would be to just settle. But again, it wasn't their fault and it wasn't our fault. We actually worked with them to switch vendors at the beginning of the project to see if they could actually get them quicker, and it still resulted in a delay at the end of the day. There were other changes on the project related to the electrical system, which we've talked about previously, but those are kind of the highlights for the electrical system. Next slide. On PCO 82 for adverse weather direct cost inefficiencies. So the original change order amount was 428,000. It was negotiated down to just under 270,000 for a cost reduction of 158,000. The primary focus here was looking at the total number of weather delay claims, 77 days, and trying to verify through our inspection reports and the on-site rain gauge and the on-site anemometer to verify that was it in fact a high wind condition? Did we in fact have enough rain? And how did that actually affect their workforces? So on the daily inspection reports, we provided samples last month, but the inspector on site does track every piece of equipment, every bit of manpower, and what task that they're working on that day. So as part of the negotiation, we were able to go back and actually evaluate, okay, well, was this a full day or a partial day slowdown? And did it affect the critical path schedule on the timeline? There's ancillary work outside of the critical path that can be done. So was that work allowed to progress? And if so, then we shouldn't be charged a full day of delay because there was still work being done. In addition, we looked at when the operations building was enclosed. And once that building was enclosed, we said, okay, there's no more weather days because you have enough critical path work was then finishing out the building. So there's no more weather days because you can work inside. So that was another aspect of our negotiation. And then one thing, it's in the memo, and I just want to mention it, the crane. So they had cranes on site, and it was used for at least the first year, if not year and a half of construction, to move all the different forms and rebar mesh walls around to build the SBR tanks. And that crane has its own anemometer at the top of the boom. And that anemometer, if it spikes above the manufacturer recommended limit on wind, then it will shut itself down. So there were days where that happened and the equipment was unusable. So that did constitute a full day slowdown because at that time that was a critical path. Next slide. I already covered all that. So I wanted to touch a little bit on change order markups because it was a bit of discussion about it last month. And the markup on all the change orders is consistent with the district's general conditions of the project specifications. That's something set by the district in the general conditions, and it allows for 15% for labor, materials, and equipment, and 5% for subcontractors. The markups on the change orders were reduced in proportion to the negotiated amounts for materials, equipment, and labor, and that's kind of what the table is trying to show you, is that as the total cost was reduced for any materials, labor, and equipment, that 15% markup was also reduced. The state did accept and has paid for these markups because it was part of the approval of the specifications and contract documents for the project. The state has had a problem with per diem markup on professional services, and that's kind of separate from the contractor and the actual physical construction component. So how Mission Springs is mitigating that is they're adhering to the caps set by the state in the grant and rejecting items that the state is not paying for on those per diem with their professional services. They have advised their consultants of such, and we don't expect that number to come back or have these rejections going forward now that that's been made clear to all the district's professional service consultants. But again, that's separate from what we're looking at here today. And last slide. So again, you saw this last month, but this is our change order negotiation process. We've gone through all the steps up to additional negotiation with the contractor. We went back and we had a second round, as General Manager Macy noted. And again, we tried to do our best to really just answer questions and provide additional justification that would help get some comfortability with the board that we had bringing these numbers to you in the first place. We were unable to identify any new information as part of this second meet and confer negotiation process that we could use to work with the contractor to try to justify additional reductions in the change order request. And with that, I'll open it for questions.
Any questions, Director Martin? Director Martin?
Comment.
You're in, Mike.
More of a comment. You know, whenever you have a job this size, you're gonna have problems. We see Evansville going in like almost overnight, but they have crews that go around and work for them all the time. They can go ahead and do something they shouldn't be doing, have it all covered up before the end of the day, and the next inspector who comes along won't see anything. So this isn't like the Amazon project going up next door. The thing with the endangered species is that does change. I have close to an acre out in what used to be the unincorporated area, and it's close by the Nancy Wright treatment plant. I used to have a bobcat that lived in my backyard. Like neighbors got nervous. I've had lots of wildlife. You don't know what's going to be there next week or next year. I just recently noticed in one little area roadrunner tracks in the tracks of a lizard. Well, that tells me something's endangered there and what it is. And so we really don't know what's going to happen with these endangered species, what kind of wildlife is going to come. So that's all understandable. So here on this change order, you've really made a reduction of $809,000 and 910. And that is the only change in the price since the original contract came out?
No, that's the cost reduction directly related to these 4 change orders that we're discussing today.
Okay.
Other individual change orders that came up during the course of construction that were within the contingency amount were negotiated on their own. But it was these ones are brought separately. They occurred after the end of the project. They're very detailed. They affected the entire course of the project. They bring in various number of changes that were brought on by changes on the project, changes that the district requested, changes that the city of DHS requested that we incorporate into the project. So they kind of lumped together, and that would take us over the approved contingency that we had. So that's why we wanted to bring it to the board, try to unpack everything, but also because we need approval to get these paid.
So I think that with the information that we have here and the reduction of $800,000 is fair. If the board, I think the board should go ahead and pay. And if the board has a problem with Shea construction in the future when they come up, we can just vote no. But for right now, I think it'd behoove the board to pay what they're asking.
Director Duff?
Just one thing. Director Marhoffen reminded me, and I apologize. One of the things that the board also asked for, which is somewhat what unorthodox when you're going through a change order discussion like this, was to have the contractor here. I failed when I introduced Steve. I failed to introduce a representative from the contractor, the project manager, Rafael Torres, who is here to answer any questions as well. And I apologize for not introducing him beforehand, but he is also here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Director Duff?
Okay, I appreciate this. There's some clarification. And, luckily I had a little time during this meeting to actually dig a little further. Because initially when I did this thing about the borough now, it's on 6:30 they're gone, right? 8:29 they return. And according to this, the raptor nesting season ends on July 31st. I'm like, well, you had a whole month. Why didn't you just go down there and start so you could take care of it? But that was when we had Hillary. And so that kind of screwed everything up. So I appreciate having this because sometimes I know you don't like to burden us with the details. Sometimes the details are what you should know by now. That some of us want the details. I just want to ask a couple questions.
Certainly.
Vice President, can you please turn your mic on?
I'm sorry, Dory. So changes are expected. So the change orders for the contingency we brought before we did them. So you said there's some change orders because we were getting into the contingency amount. We brought those before the board. Did you do those before you did the change or after?
My apologies, Director Griffith. I'm not sure I understand the question. When the district approved the project, they approved a 10% contingency that gives us some flexibility to approve change orders as they come up. These
Gives
ones that were
you the ability to approve the change orders. Is that what you're saying? Not
no, not me, as a consultant. I make a recommendation to district staff, and they
So district staff is making.
have oversight in the.
Okay, okay, that's kind of my, because I'm thinking, well, if you're bringing them to us first and we're approving them during the contingency period, but these are coming afterwards. And this is one of my issues, is the fact that there's a whole ton of this coming after the fact, not allowing us to take a look at this and say, because we're not unreasonable, we might seem, Amber and I may seem unreasonable at times, but we're actually not. Giving us an opportunity to look at these and say, hey, okay, we're aware there's an issue. It's going to cost more. It's the coming in after and saying, oh, look, we need this. Something you said, though, I got to be honest, kind of pissed me off. And that is that one of the questions on there was my question was, you're charging profit on a meeting, on a mandatory meeting. So you're not just paying for the time of the meeting, but we're going to make some money off of that. And your response was, this is part of our standard in our contract, the markup per se. I don't consider putting, and I know there's a thing in here about how we separate it into markup and profit, but putting the word profit on a mandatory meeting is an issue. And then saying, but the state approved it all. You know, it's that just because they did ethically doesn't mean it's right. And so what I think I want you and everybody out there to understand is that we are a disadvantaged community. And so even if the state goes ahead and pays that, that's money that the state could use maybe for another grant for, I don't know, the previous item. So just because they do it doesn't make it right. And are you actually looking at the fact that you are in a community where 50% live in poverty, and everything that we do ends up on them? They have to pay for this in some form or another. So I would ask that you rethink the state pays for it, so it's okay, and really think about those kind of things. Because I'm going to ask that in all of our contracts moving forward, that any kind of markup or profit from a meeting is not permitted, because I just think, personally, I think it's a little ridiculous. So that's just kind of my commentary. Other than that, I appreciate all this. And I have a couple more days to fully digest before we talk again. And now I'll give you to the real.
Not the case at all.
Director Griffith, one thing I failed to mention in my talking points is, you know, the district does have, and I may have misspoke on the markup, but what I meant to say is the contractor used the full amount that was allotted to them in the contract documents. We can change that. The district can make a policy decision, as we've talked about at several points during this board meeting, to lower that or to cap it or put specific requirements on that. I think the district has attempted to do that and it has a potential to scare contractors away. That may not always be a bad thing, but it may not always be a good thing, because you may not get competitive bids. But that's something that I would implore the board to maybe look into. What's in your contract today is in line with industry standard. So a little bit.
I did see that note, but just because that's industry standard doesn't, I'm not the kind of person, if you were bidding on my house, I'm probably going to be a prick to you. Okay. Because I don't care if it's the industry standard, it's what is best for me. And I have to look out for the people that I represent. So
fair enough. That's a very good point. Thank you.
Oh, boy.
Only those circumstances?
How do I follow that up? First of all, I want to thank all of the work that TKE has put in and working with JF Shea. I also want to thank JF Shea and all of the subcontractors and contractors who built us a very beautiful building, which I believe will last us generations. And for that, we are very appreciative. And I want to just put that out there. All the man hours and the hard work that went out there is valued, and we don't want to stray from that. All of I appreciated the response line by line. And for me, I was at $300,000 because it was based on the markups, just in looking at how it looked. There was no way for me. I'm just wanting to explain, especially to our contractor. There was no way in looking at the information provided us to see that you actually removed all charges by all subcontractors on the dates that we agreed were not going to be a no work day. And I know that all of this says that it was done, as a whole, everything was reduced based on the agreed reduction. That still doesn't tell me that I'm not paying for a subcontractor on days that it wasn't there, right? That we aren't agreeing to pay for. I'm not going to argue that. I don't want to see any of us spending legal fees on anything, but I did want you to understand where I was coming from. When a layperson looks at something their tax dollars are going toward, we should be able to know that that money went exactly where it said it was going to go, and that if there was question, it was removed. That, even with this notation, does not tell me that. It says that it was removed proportionately, and it says that it was reviewed and reduced. And again, it was $300,000 that was on my calculations when I went over everything, and I didn't think that was going to be a deal breaker. But I'm not one to wallow in a loss either. So I'm not trying to do that either. But at the same time, echoing a little bit of what Director Griffith said, you have to know where you're working. You have to know the community you're working for. And our job is to make sure that we are being financially, fiscally responsible, that we are making sure everyone that does everything for us is doing so to set the example for what we as a district stand for. So you were out there, preparing our wastewater treatment facility. So for me, all the stormwater prevention actions that were taken were very important, not because we have a lot of rain events that would cause a lot of problems, but because the public needed to see that we make sure every contractor follows every single one of the rules that exist, because we are setting the example for protecting our aquifer. Steve knows that I disagree that all of that happened all the time. And we've had many discussions on that, and we'll agree to disagree on some of that. But I think that a big part of our issue was that the previous general manager may have been aware, but none of us were. None of us sitting on this dais were aware of these change orders and that they were coming, and that everyone, that there was people even aware. So when it came to us, we were shocked. So in the future, when you have an obligation to a board, make sure your general manager is allowing you to communicate with them so that this doesn't happen to you in the future. Because I think that a lot of our reactions were because of that initial shock, because again, we were unaware it was coming. And if we had been included in those conversations or in the problems or delays we were having with the city, some of us could have started helping with that, just like we did when the state was giving us trouble. You now have people on your board that are willing to go to Sacramento and go to DC and go stand in people's faces saying, show us our checks. This is not acceptable. So just realize that you have team members also that are willing to fight for what's right for their district and for their contracts. So please come more instead of less. And I hope that we can find a way in our contracts in the future, General Manager Macy, to find a way to meet the industry standard, yet protect abuse at the same time. Thank you very much.
Director Duff, several good points. One thing we are looking at that was actually Raphael even recommended is taking a look at how we're handling potential burrowing owl habitat throughout the M2 area and making sure that that's a little bit more descript and very clear on what will be acceptable and will not be acceptable in that project. So we are taking some lessons learned here and trying to further protect the district's interest going forward. And I think Director Meyerhoffen brought that up even back in January, that you need to anticipate and expect. So we need to make sure that our contractors are aware of that, because they may not be there today, but they could be there tomorrow.
And something to just add from my Coachella Valley Association of Governments meeting today, we were briefed on the Department of Fish and Wildlife's efforts to move to putting the burrowing owl as a listed endangered species. They're very serious with that action. They're talking about it by the end of the year. So that is something that everyone will need to take account.
Just so you know, so Tuesday night I left work late and I was driving down a residential street and I had to stop because there is a burrowing owl in that area that was standing and just staring at me in the middle of the road. That's the second, it's the same guy, I know it is. It's the second time. So that they are in the residential areas. So I applaud your efforts to think about that, because I had to wait until he eventually walked away. And obviously that was a delay, but didn't cost anybody anything, but they're there.
One more thing to add, and hopefully it's okay to share. We did have the biologists go out and do a pre-construction survey throughout M2. So we're at least aware of habitat that existed as of January 2025. And that will be included in the specifications package for M2 that the contractors see, that they should be aware of and understand that they may need to move workforces and continue production work around those sensitive areas. Also including the new CDFW requirements for burrowing owl, because now it is a listed species. So it's one step closer to endangered species that, as Director Duff noted, is likely to come by the end of the year.
When are we throwing the switch?
We are scheduled to start bringing over sludge on Monday, the 24th.
Awesome. Thank you.
Week and a half. From the conveyance line. Yeah.
She's making reference to the sewer down 19.
And I just will say, I really appreciate all the work from our staff and TKE and JFSHA. The negotiations that have already happened to knock 30% off. So I really appreciate everything that went into it. I think, like Director Meyerhoffen said, things are bound to come up in a project so big, and I appreciate the effort that goes into make those changes. And I feel like everything that was done was in according to the contract we had in place. So just thank you, and I appreciate the questions and comments from all of our board members, and I look forward to Tuesday. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, President Sewell and members of the board. Thank you.
Discussion items, are we doing those today? 12 and 13?
We will do those on Tuesday.
Okay. Moving on to consent agenda, we have our approval of minutes, item 16, and item 17, register of demands. Any discussion on this today? All right. Director's reports, are we okay doing this on Monday or Tuesday?
Tuesday.
General manager's report?
We will be doing the finance report and the public affairs report on Tuesday, but if there's any questions with what was in your packet, we're more than listen to them today.
Any questions on those items for today?
Perfect.
Item 20, district council comments.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, I won't be here on Tuesday. Mr. Cutbirth will be here, and so the closed session will be occurring on Tuesday.
Great. Item 21, director comments and requests for future agenda items. This consists of general comments, future agenda items, and future meetings. Director Duff?
Yes. Director Duff, there was a meeting on Monday for the cannabis people, and I was the alternate. I was wondering if you were able to go or why I didn't hear.
There was a spa, sit and soak and paint event.
Yes, there was.
It was not a meeting. It was a networking spa event and I did not attend, and I did not think to ask the alternate to attend something that was not a meeting.
Those are the meetings that we have been attending for the last 2 years. I don't agree with it.
When I attended CV Can, I only attended the meetings they had and the holiday party. I didn't attend any of the golfing or any of the other networking functions.
So my point is we need some clarity as to what
Yes.
we're going to, is what I'm looking for here, rather than one individual trying to change things. What are we doing there at that cannabis meeting? Which ones should we be paid to go to? I had no idea we were ever at a board meeting. And I think I sent you a letter or an email dates way back about how I really didn't want to attend it anymore. But apparently I was still cooperating and going to those meetings. But anyways, we need to take a look at that and some other meetings and just how many people should be getting on an airplane and flying for a convention. And it's almost $4,000 a person to head up to Washington, DC. The airfare and the travel, the whole show comes out to be a lot of money. You're worried about Director Martin and I maybe going outside of town for a total cost of under $500, probably be around 300 if we went to an event outside of town, and we have to come back here and check with the board. Meanwhile, you guys are spending $4,000 to get on an airplane. So I think that needs to be looked at also.
We bring back.
The other the other thing that came up was something about I wasn't paying attention to the minutes. I have 2 years worth of copies of the minutes. I've been looking at the minutes, and yes, the director is absolutely correct. I haven't said anything, but I'll talk with, I believe, General Manager Macy. Are you we voted for you to be the secretary? You the
Yes,
secretary?
I'm secretary.
Okay. I'll be speaking with you about those minutes. I have been paying attention. I haven't said anything. There's a reason why I haven't said anything in the last 2 years. So I will be speaking with you about those at another time.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all.
And I'll just respond that every meeting we go over consent agenda. So if you have an issue, please bring it up. And regarding the affiliates list, I think it's pretty spelled out. So I would just say that there is no clarification on CV Can meetings. So if it's a meeting you can't attend, if you could let your alternate know that regarding any meeting, if you're not able to attend, please let your alternate know. Did you have something?
Yeah, I just want to add that I don't want to underestimate the value of attending functions put on by agencies, whether they're in fact a meeting or something that's more socially input, because part of the value of our attending events in the community is the interaction and the networking that we're able to do because of our attendance there. I also want to point out that, and that's not a criticism, Ted, but on the first one on the no daily stipend was claimed on the 24th. You attended this guide board tour with me, and it's not listed here. I don't know whether you're submitting meetings where there's no stipend, that you're not including them or not. But the important thing is really, I made this comment to people when I'm running for office, or when just any type of criticism that we're getting paid too much, is I only get paid for half of the meetings that I attend to represent the water district in this community. And I think it's important to include all of the things that you go to, whether you're paid or not, in the second half of here, and make sure that you're included. Anyway, that's all I have.
I agree with you, and I'll start doing that. I have attended 4, maybe 5 ribbon cuttings locally, and I haven't included any of nobody from the water district, except for the one time I seen you at the grand opening, is going to them. So I just never really said anything, but if you'd like me to, I'll start putting down everything that I
let
do.
people know how
Yes.
active you are in the community.
Right, because part of me going to those meetings is actually covered by other meetings that I go to. That, so yeah, it's could be a full-time job going to half the meetings you get paid for, and the other half you don't.
Right.
So I appreciate that input, and I'll work on that. Thank you.
Any further comments? With that, the meeting is adjourned.